Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta. And before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about a new video game that myself and General Drown just put out. It's called Lunar Echoes. It's a short horror narrative featuring the voices of myself and Autumn Ivy about a geologist on the moon who experiences the Earth exploding. We finished this for a game jam. It's available now for PC, Mac, and Linux, and like I said, it's free. You can check it out in the link in the description down below. And now, on to tonight's story. On October 16, 1962, every man, woman, and child disappeared from the town of Edmonton, Kentucky. The date is relatively easy to pin down. The day before, October 15th, a traveling salesman named Arnold Johnson passed through the small town in an unsuccessful attempt to sell an exciting new product: the bagless vacuum cleaner. During an interview with authorities afterwards, Johnson said he noticed nothing unusual about Edmonton the day before the disappearances. He did, however, remark that none of the housewives he spoke with during his brief stay seemed remotely interested in his product, something he found slightly surprising compared to the response he typically received when demonstrating the vacuum cleaner to a similarly sized town. "Not only did I not sell a single vacuum cleaner, but no one even wanted to see the product in action," he said during the interview. "If you can get in the door and show the woman what the vacuum could do, you were guaranteed a sale." Johnson chalked up his failure to the apprehension related to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which had begun a day before and had been dominating the airwaves. "It's hard to sell a vacuum cleaner when your audience thinks there's a possibility there'll be radioactive dust by the end of the week," he said. Johnson left the town of Edmonton the evening of October 15th. The next town on his sales route, Clement, was 80 miles away. He drove all night and didn't think about Edmonton until the investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation knocked on his door 2 weeks later. During the early morning hours of October 17th, Randall Pierce, a farmer who sold his produce to the only grocer in Edmonton, drove into town to discover empty streets and closed storefronts. "It was eerie," Pierce told the county newspaper later. "Usually at 7 in the morning, that little town is bustling. I thought I'd maybe driven up during a holiday." Pierce lived with his wife and 3 children on a farm 15 minutes outside of Edmonton. Like most farming families in the early 1960s, Pierce's wife homeschooled their children when they weren't helping their father tend the farm. "And I couldn't think of any holiday that would close up a town in the middle of October, so I started getting a little spooked," Pierce said. "I knocked on the doors of a few houses. I didn't get a response on many of them. Around 8 o'clock, I realized there wasn't a single soul in Edmonton." Shaken and a little disoriented, Pierce returned home to his wife and children. He told them what he had seen, or not seen, in Edmonton, and with nationalistic fears of a communist invasion running rampant, his wife convinced him to drive to Clement and report what he had seen to the authorities. The Pierce family had no phone at their farm. Pierce arrived in Clement shortly after noon and immediately pulled into the parking lot of the local police department. He told the authorities what he had witnessed in Edmonton. Initially, as Pierce tells it, his story was met with disbelief and ridicule. But after multiple calls to Edmonton's police chief went unanswered, Clement's sheriff, Jonathan Ambrose, gathered a group of men and traveled to Edmonton to investigate Pierce's claims. Sheriff Ambrose died of lung cancer in 1968. However, in spite of being a veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, on his deathbed, Ambrose said that his visit to Edmonton on October 17th was, quote, "the most disturbing and haunting experience of my entire life," end quote. And thinking about the events of that day would still, quote, "turn the blood in his veins to ice." According to the most recent census, 236 individuals lived in Edmonton in 1960. It was a small town nestled between the hills of western Kentucky, named after a captain who was killed during the Battle of 1812. Edmondson was populated primarily by the ancestors who founded the town in 1825. Edmondson had one public school, a grocery store, a bank, Wells Fargo, a hospital clinic, 2 churches, Baptist and Methodist, and a post office. Most of the men worked small farms like Pierce, or ran a trade. Edmondson, like most small communities in rural areas, was self-sufficient and self-sustaining. Every 2 weeks, the grocery store would be restocked, and the post office would deliver mail every Tuesday. For entertainment, the residents of Edmondson would have to visit Clement, or another nearby town. On October 17, 1962, Clement Sheriff Ambrose, 2 deputies, and the Clement's primary physician piled into a squad car and followed County Farmer Randall Pierce back to Edmondson. Ambrose carried his service pistol, an M1911A1, and ordered his deputies to bring their shotguns, Browning 12-gauge pump actions. The physician, Alan Cathy, was brought along in case a mass casualty event had taken place. Before he died in 1968, Ambrose recounted the events of October 17th to his older son, who transcribed his father's testimony and published it in a men's magazine to little fanfare in 1974. It was a 2-hour drive from Clement to Edmondson. We all expected to show up in that little town and find nothing wrong except for a drunk police chief who overslept his shift, Ambrose said. However, I couldn't deny the fact that a palpable tension was present in the squad car. My 2 deputies kept fiddling with their shotguns. Cathy wouldn't stop rummaging through his physician's bag. Same type of behavior I'd observe among soldiers before we set up to launch a big assault. Upon arriving in Edmondson, they immediately realized something was, in fact, very wrong. Pierce and Ambrose parked their cars in front of the grocery store along the main street. It was just as Pierce had described it. The town seemed completely devoid of life. Ambrose, who personally knew Edmondson's police chief and where he lived, decided they should check out his home first. The 5 men set out on foot into the residential neighborhood. All the men were struck by the silence. It was then that one of the deputies realized that not only were there no people in town, there were no animals to speak of. Yards with fences that clearly meant to keep in dogs were noticeably empty. The men arrived at the police chief's home to find the front door unlocked. Ambrose, with his gun drawn, entered the house first and was followed by his 2 shotgun-toting deputies. I don't know what we expected to find, Ambrose said. I honestly thought we'd find a body. Maybe poisonous gas leaked from the ground at some point during the night and killed off the whole town. The police chief's house was empty. The bed was made up in the bedroom, and the fridge still contained bottles of fresh milk. The men were baffled. Maybe, they thought, the townspeople had left to attend a large community picnic, but as the hours dragged on and the search continued, that possibility grew less likely. We searched 6 other houses in the neighborhood after we canvassed the police chief's house, Ambrose said. Always the same story. The house seemed fine, no signs of forced entry. Unlocked doors, no occupants. However, a few similarities began to make themselves apparent as the men made their way from house to house. For one, there was no luggage to be found anywhere in the homes, and it appeared as if a majority of the clothing was missing from drawers and wardrobes. Pierce, the farmer, also noticed that most of the food left in the pantries and refrigerators were perishable. There were no canned goods. Ambrose, who had just finished reading C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, remembered thinking, it's as if the whole town just packed up their belongings and boarded a bus to heaven. Some of the discoveries were less benign. In the backyard of one home, the men discovered a dead Labrador retriever. One of the deputies stumbled across an animal and thought at first he was sleeping. The dog was wearing a collar and was loosely chained to a tree in the backyard. It was the first animal they'd seen in Edmondson since arriving 2 hours earlier. While the men searched the home, Kathy, the physician, performed an ad hoc autopsy on the animal. Rigor mortis had only recently set in, indicating the dog had not been dead for more than a day. Additionally, Kathy found raw hamburger meat in the animal's stomach. Hamburger meat that had been peppered with small white pills. The dog had been poisoned. In another home, they found the words Revelation 9:7 scrawled on a bathroom mirror in light pink lipstick. The men were unfamiliar with the Bible verse, and this led to the next disquieting discovery. They couldn't find a single Bible in the town. Edmondson had 2 churches, and it could be deduced that a majority of the township probably attended one or the other. In the early 1960s, a vast majority of Americans considered themselves Christian, and even those who wouldn't consider themselves very devoted could be expected to at least own a Bible. However, Ambrose and his men couldn't locate a Bible in any of the homes they searched. When they inspected both churches, they found only hymnals and books of common prayer in the pews. Except for the poisoned dog, during their 3-hour search of Edmondson, they found no signs of violence or struggle. Every home's interior looked impeccable, and running water and electricity appeared to be in working order. Ambrose was reminded of the model communities in the U.S. Army, those that were built in New Mexico to test the destructive power of the atomic bomb. As the sun began to slip beneath the trees, and the men's shadows grew longer and dimmer, Ambrose detected another palpable sense of urgency brewing amongst members of the group. It was obvious the men didn't want to remain in Edmondson after sundown, Ambrose said. I felt it too, and I somehow sensed that if we stayed in Edmondson overnight, it'd be another group of men from Clement trying to find us the next afternoon. And, I don't think they'd find us. Before twilight ended, the men loaded up in their cars, the 2 deputies, Kathy and Ambrose, in the squad car, Pierce in his truck, and they left Edmondson. Even though they knew the town was empty, each man reported a creeping sensation that they were being watched from the darkened windows of the homes they passed on their way out of town. We didn't talk much on the ride back to Clement. I'd be lying if I said I was driving with any regard towards the speed limit, Ambrose said. We had to get out of there. At some point, I was convinced we'd stumbled across Ground Zero as some new communist weapon system. Something that would vaporize the inhabitants of an entire town without causing any collateral damage. Even then, I knew that story didn't completely add up. After the men arrived back in Clement, they agreed that Ambrose would contact the federal government in the morning. None of the men expressed any interest in returning to Edmondson. That night, Ambrose retrieved his family's Bible from their study and flipped to Revelation 9:1. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. I didn't know what to make of that, Ambrose said. The next morning, Ambrose reported what he had seen in Edmondson to the governing authorities in Frankfurt. Things began moving very quickly after that. While the rest of the world was transfixed by the escalating tension between Cuba and the United States, the FBI sent an investigation team to investigate the disappearance of Edmondson. Fearing a communist plot, or as Ambrose had suspected, the use of a powerful new weapon, the FBI shut down access to Edmondson in October 19th of 1962. The strange case of Edmondson made its way into a few local papers, but it was a story that always ended up buried beneath pages of international news. Because many of the town's inhabitants were ancestors of the people who founded the town, there weren't too many relatives inquiring about the status of their loved ones. The roads that passed through Edmondson, there were very few, were rerouted around the town. The FBI finished their investigation in 1967. By then, no one really cared about Edmondson anymore. In between the town's disappearance in 1962 and the FBI's final report on the incident, the nation's attention had been distracted by a number of earth-shaking events: the assassination of President Kennedy, the civil rights movement, and the U.S.'s involvement in Vietnam. Unfortunately, the results of the FBI investigation were sealed and deemed confidential. As the decades progressed, nature began to overtake Edmondson, Kentucky. No attempt was made to rebuild or resettle the town. Edmondson soon became a little-known historical footnote in Kentucky's history, while many of the structures collapsed due to exposure. A handful of homes and one of the churches remained standing, enshrouded by thick vines and a thriving deer population. In 2002, the official report from the FBI was made public after a local historian placed a Freedom of Information request. Dennis Miller, president and sole member of the Edmondson Historical Society, learned the FBI officially declared the reason for the town's spontaneous abandonment as fears related to the possibility of nuclear annihilation and unexplained atomic phenomena, ones that had led to a panic-induced dispersal of the town. Now, of course, that reason was bullshit, Miller said. The reason didn't even mention the fact that none of the townsfolk had ever been accounted for. There were no reports of atmospheric phenomenon by anyone in the area. However, by then, a new theory had emerged regarding the fate of the Edmondson inhabitants. A theory that began circulating after two self-proclaimed backyard adventurers stumbled upon a hatch in the basement of the abandoned First Baptist Church of Edmondson. The Mammoth Cave in Kentucky is the world's largest known cave system. At least 400 miles have been mapped, and some scientists estimate there could be another 600 miles that are unexplored and have never been seen by human eyes. As of 2016, 26 entrances into the cave system have been discovered, and in 1981, one of those entrances were discovered in the ruins of Edmondson, Kentucky. During the late 1970s, the abandoned ruins of Edmondson attained a cult status amongst backpackers and hitchhikers in the area. With the roads leading to Edmondson in despair, getting to the abandoned town is extremely difficult. But every year, intrepid amateur adventurers and curious locals would make their trek to one of the country's greatest but forgotten unsolved mysteries. 19 years after the disappearances, hikers Emilio Stevens and Julie Page parked their vehicles 30 miles outside the edge of the forest that surrounds the abandoned township and began their trek to Edmondson. "We'd visited Edmondson 2 years before that day," Stevens said to a scientific journal afterwards. "Oh, it's creepy as hell. Takes about a day and a half to reach the town from the trailhead, and when you get there, you really don't feel like sticking around. Most hikers pass through it or they camp overnight on the outskirts. That November, Julie and I planned on staying overnight in the church. I think it was more about testing our nerves, than anything else." The church Stephen was talking about is the First Baptist Church of Edmondson. It's the largest structure still standing in the town. The grocery store and Methodist church collapsed in the late 1960s. "We were in Edmondson around nightfall on the second day," Stevens said. "Julie wasn't feeling too hot, and it was beginning to sprinkle. So we set our tents in the center of the church, and we prepared for our night. I could tell it was going to be like a miserable night. The roof of the church leaked. A lot of pews had been destroyed by vandals and raccoons." As they settled in for the night, Stevens and Page both couldn't shake a creeping sense of dread. Even though they had hiked into Edmondson before, they both felt unprepared for the degree of uneasiness that they were experiencing. Around midnight, however, exhaustion got the better of the two of them, and they fell asleep. 2 hours later, Stevens awoke to a loud cracking sound. "At first I thought it was thunder, but then the floor slanted and we were falling," Stevens said. "There's nothing more disorienting than waking up in a tent and experiencing the sensation of free fall." The floor of the church had collapsed in the middle of the night, flinging Stevens and Page into an as-of-yet undiscovered basement. Luckily, both Stevens and Page survived the fall without any serious injury. Now, we were both pretty shaken and, frankly, a little banged up, Stevens said. But in all the time that we had spent in and around Edmondson, we never heard of a basement in the Baptist church. We knew that we'd found something no one else knew about. Armed with only their flashlights, Stevens and Page sat exploring the decrepit basement. The room was hidden beneath the floorboards of the church and was small and appeared to have been carved into the bedrock beneath the building's foundation. Stevens said there wasn't much to see. It looked as if the room had been used to store extra tables and chairs, presumably for after-church socials. But then, they found the hatch. Page found it in the far corner of the basement, Stevens said. It was set flush against the floor of the basement, and it was made of 4 thick wood planks. The hinges, they'd been bolted into the bedrock on the left side. The door had one of those old-fashioned drop ring handles. Stevens gripped the hold of the drop ring handle, and after several tries, wrenched the hatch open. A square of darkness stared back up at him. Page activated and dropped the glow stick into the shaft. The pale green glow of the stick stopped about 5 feet from the mouth of the hatch. I mean, we had to go down there, Stevens said. It's probably 3 a.m. We for sure as hell weren't about to go back to sleep. Stevens tied a climbing rope to his back pant loop and dropped down through the hatch. Page stayed above and metered out the rope as Stevens progressed into the darkness. So at the bottom of the shaft, a passageway opened up to my left. It was pointing westward. It was obvious by then that I was traveling through a cave tunnel. And that it was not, man-made, Stevens said. Eventually, the tunnel tightened, and Stevens found himself crawling on his hands and knees. The roof of the passage scratched by his back, and his hands began to get rubbed raw by the cave's rough floor. Now, I'm not claustrophobic, but it started getting really tight, Stevens said. I began worrying about not being able to turn around and get back to the hatch, but I started to hear something coming up from ahead of me. I should have been freaked out, but at that point I figured that I'd just gone too far to bail out. After 15 minutes of crawling, Stevens was straining to put his shoulders through the ever-tightening passageway, but the eerie noises emanating from ahead drove him deeper into the cave. However, his adventure came to an abrupt end. The passageway ended at a pile of rocks, Stevens said. Each rock looked to be about the size of my head. It completely blocked any further spelunking. I could hear noises clearly now. I could even distinguish words and phrases, but my journey was done. However, right before the passageway terminated at the cave-in, Stevens found a couple of objects. He put them in his jacket and began backing out. It took him 30 minutes to back up out of the tight passageway. When he made it up out of the shaft and back into the church's basement to a relieved Page, he took out the objects and inspected them. I found an old pair of glasses, like old-fashioned reader's glasses, and a woman's shoe with the heel missing. It didn't mean anything to us at the time. Stevens and Page hiked out of Edmondson early the next morning, battered and spooked. When they reached their car, they immediately headed into Mammoth National Park and reported what they had found to a park ranger. In the investigation that followed, it was determined that Stevens and Page had discovered an entrance to an unmapped portion of the Mammoth Cave. Unfortunately, geologists determined that the cave-in, the one that had stopped Stevens' progress, was at least 100 feet thick. Unless they used explosives, there was no way to investigate further. However, it was the discovery of the cave entrance, coupled with the objects that Stevens found, that held disturbing implications for the unsolved mystery of the disappearance in Edmondson 20 years prior. Historians dated the eyeglasses and the woman's shoe to the late 1950s, in the early 1960s. Most historians and geological experts are now in near unanimous agreement about what happened to the inhabitants of Edmonson, Kentucky in 1962. Driven by fear of a first strike by Cuba during the missile crisis and religious fanaticism, the people of Edmonton sought refuge in a secret labyrinth cave system underneath their town. Unfortunately, a cave-in, perhaps triggered by their panicked influx through the tight passageway, trapped every man, woman, and child deep underground. Yeah, it's deeply unsettling when you realize that at the same time Sheriff Ambrose and his men were exploring the town, everyone they were searching for was probably about 400 feet underneath their feet, said Tom Saw, a ranger at Mammoth National Park. If they had fresh water and food, and if the cave had a clean air supply, some experts believe that the people of Edmonton could have survived for at least 6 months underground. I reckon it's a pretty good theory, Stevens said. But it still doesn't explain what I heard that night. The reason I dropped down through the hatch and crawled on my hands and knees for like 15 minutes. It doesn't explain the singing I heard. While I was crawling down there, I clearly heard voices. I heard them singing the hymn, Come Thou Fount. Dennis Miller started the Edmonton Historical Society in 2001 to raise awareness about the town and the mystery surrounding it. He was 12 years old. It really is a 20th century Roanoke, Miller said, referencing the New England colony that disappeared in the 1590s. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to figure out what happened. Miller lived in Clement, and on his days when he's not researching Edmonton, he runs a small pawn shop. Many people would consider Miller's fascination with Edmonton to border on obsession, but when they learn about Miller's personal history with the area, it begins to make sense. During a family camping trip in 1997, Miller's father and mother went missing after making camp in the wilderness 3 miles north of Edmonton. Miller, who was 7 at the time, was with them when they disappeared. We camped often, and we used a big tent, the 3 of us. That night, we went to bed around 9 after cooking hot dogs. I woke up around 1 in the morning and realized my parents weren't in the tent anymore, and the front flaps were open. Miller spent 2 days alone in the woods, never straying far from the campsite in case his parents came back. After sustaining on hot dog buns and marshmallows, he was discovered by another set of campers passing through the area. After searching the area for 2 weeks, the police officially concluded that I had been abandoned in the woods by my parents. But that's not true. See, my parents loved me. I never doubted that, and if they had abandoned me, why didn't they hike to their car? It was found, untouched at the trailhead. After the investigation closed, Miller spent the next decade of his life in and out of the foster care system, driven by a desire to protect his parents' reputation and validate their love for him. Miller began reviewing historical records in libraries and did a sweep of the police records in the surrounding areas. Some might accuse Miller of attempting to connect unrelated dots, but some of his data and findings are shocking, to say the least. For example, the 3 counties that border the location of Edmonton have a missing persons rate 17 times higher than similarly sized counties in the United States. It's an area we sometimes refer to as the Kentucky Triangle, said FBI agent Brittany Hooper, head of the state's Missing Person Division. For some reason, a lot of people seem to disappear in those counties. Some of the disappearances can be attributed to caving accidents, the vast swath of unmapped wilderness, and the recent boom of meth operations in rural areas. Also, Stevens wasn't the first person to report hearing strange voices and singing in and around the Mammoth Cave system. Some people consider Mammoth National Park to be the most haunted national park in the United States. There have been dozens of accounts of people hearing strange noises in the woods and caves since the 1970s, as well as sightings of a tall, humanoid-like creature called the Black Demon, according to unrelated local lore. Geologists and historians dismiss many of these accounts. After Stevens told authorities that he had been following the voices of singing as he made his way through the passageways, expert cavers were quick to point out that even if he had heard people singing, it could not have come from behind the cave-in rocks. The cave-in was too thick for sound to penetrate. Also, because Mammoth National Park sits on top of the Mammoth Cave system, it's not unreasonable to assume that a lot of the strange noises and voices are a result of sounds bouncing and echoing throughout the caves. Caves are, after all, notorious for their disorienting acoustics. But Miller had a different theory. A theory as macabre as it would be revelatory if it turned out to be true. "I think the people of Edmondson are still alive," Miller said. "I think they're down there in an unmapped portion of the cave system, and that they've chosen to stay below. It's been about 70 years since they went in, which means that the first generations probably mostly died off, and it's an entire second or third generation that only knows life underground." As for the disappearances, Miller has an answer for that too. Every now and then, I think they found other exits. Every now and then, they come out and take people, hikers, drifters, campers, locals, Miller said. "I think that's what happened to my parents. It's been happening years before they were taken in, and it continues on till today." On his days off, you can find Miller searching the forests around Edmondson and the outskirts of Mammoth National Park for additional entrances into Mammoth Cave system. He carries a GPS locator, rappelling gear, and multiple flashlights, and a Colt 45 automatic pistol. Now, for some reason, they don't want to be seen by us, Miller said. "I don't know what they do with the people they take, but I know what it takes to maintain an underground society. It requires food and a fresh gene pool. I like thinking about what that meant for my mom and dad, but even if the truth is ugly, at least I know. I'll be able to do something about it." In spite of being armed, as soon as the sun begins to slink behind the trees, Miller makes sure to abandon his search and head back to his vehicle. You'll never find me spending the night in those woods. Never again. I've spent my entire professional life studying the Titanic, but nothing could have prepared me for how deeply the ship would eventually consume me. My name is Dr. Michael Hartley, and I'm a maritime historian specializing in the RMS Titanic. For 20 years, I've dedicated my life to understanding every minute detail of that tragic voyage. The passengers, the crew, the intricate social dynamics, the fatal design flaws. What began as academic fascination gradually transformed into an obsession that would ultimately unravel my entire perception of reality. The artifact came from a private collection in Southampton. An elderly collector, Harold Jameson, had contacted me after hearing about my reputation. He claimed to have something unusual, personal effects recovered from the wreckage that had never been properly documented. Most researchers would have been skeptical, but my hunger for untold stories always outweighed my caution. When the package arrived, it was surprisingly modest. A small leather satchel, water-stained and fragile, contained what appeared to be personal documents, a tarnished locket, and a small fragment of fabric. The moment my fingers brushed against the items, something felt different. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The fabric was what caught my attention first, a small, roughly triangular piece of third-class passenger clothing, its coarse, dark wool with intricate stitching. As I examined it under my magnifying glass, the edge unexpectedly caught my skin. A thin, precise cut opened across my palm, tiny droplets of blood immediately welling up. I should have cleaned the wound immediately. I should have been more careful, but something about the artifact held me transfixed. The blood seemed to absorb into the fabric. Not seep, not stain, but absorb, like the material was drinking it. And for a split second, I could have sworn the fabric's color deepened, becoming richer, more vibrant. And that was the first moment that I heard the whispers. It was faint at first, so quiet. I initially thought it was the wind or the ambient noise of my study, fragmented words in a language that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Desperate. Terrified. No escape. Water rising. God help me. I dismissed it as imagination. Exhaustion from weeks of intense research, but as the days progressed, the whispers became more persistent, more defined. By the third night, I knew something fundamental had changed. The dreams began. Vivid, horrifyingly detailed nightmares that felt less like dreams, more like memories. I wasn't observing, I was experiencing. It was Thomas. Thomas Riley, a 22-year-old Irish immigrant from a small village outside Dublin. Third-class passenger dreaming of a better life in America, scraped together every penny for that ticket on the Titanic. In these dreams, these memories, I could feel the cramped conditions of steerage, smell of unwashed bodies, constant background noise of children crying, and adults speaking in a dozen different languages, the hope, the desperation, and then the eyes. The first impact was nothing like the dramatic Hollywood depictions, a subtle shudder. Most passengers didn't even realize something was wrong. But Thomas knew. Something in his bones understood the terrible mathematics of what was happening. Water. Cold, rising. Panic would come later. First would be the terrible, suffocating realization of doom. Every night the dreams grew more intense, more real. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my lungs burning, convinced I was drowning. And my sheets would be damp, smelling of salt and industrial coal smoke. Something was happening to me, something I couldn't explain. The cut on my hand didn't heal properly. What began as a simple wound transformed into something different. The skin around the cut remained perpetually raw, with an iridescent quality that shifted colors when caught in certain lights. Blues and grays like deep ocean water. Sometimes, if I stared too long, I could swear the wound moved. Not visibly, but with a subtle, internal rippling. My research became increasingly erratic. Colleagues noticed the change. Dr. Elizabeth Moreau, my longtime research partner, approached me during a conference, her concern etched deep in the lines of her face. "Michael, you look terrible," she said, not unkindly. "When was the last time you slept?" I couldn't tell her about the dreams, about Thomas, about the memories that weren't mine. The artifacts from the Southampton collection began to consume my every waking moment. I cataloged them obsessively, discovering minute details that had escaped previous researchers. A ticket stub with a partial fingerprint, a fragment of a letter, water-damaged but still partially legible, a brass button from a third-class steward's uniform. Each item seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain. The whispers grew stronger. During the day, they were subtle. Background noises that could be mistaken for the hum of fluorescent lights or the distant murmur of traffic, but at night they became a symphony of terror. Hundreds of voices overlapping, desperate. The water. Can't breathe. Too cold. I started keeping a journal. Not for academic purposes, but as a desperate attempt to maintain my sanity, to track the progression of whatever was happening to me. Entry, October 17th. The dreams are becoming more specific. I'm not just experiencing Thomas's memories, I'm beginning to understand his entire life, his hopes, his fears. The smell of his mother's bread. Calluses on his hands from work in the fields, the weight of his single best suit, purchased specifically for the journey to America. I know the exact moment he realized the ship was doomed. It was a sudden realization, not a dramatic moment of terror, just a slow, terrible understanding that crept into his consciousness like ice-cold water. The cut on my hand started to change. Small, intricate patterns began to emerge around the wound, patterns that looked like nautical maps, like the complex network of corridors inside the Titanic, thin, blue-gray lines that seemed to move when I wasn't directly looking at them. My sleep became a battlefield. One moment I was Dr. Michael Hartley, respected historian, meticulous researcher. The next I was Thomas Riley, poor, desperate, trapped. The boundary between us was dissolving and something else was emerging, something that had been waiting, buried deep beneath the cold Atlantic waters for over a century, something that wanted to be remembered. By November, I was losing myself. My apartment became a sprawling archive of Titanic ephemera. Walls covered in maritime maps, passenger lists, photographs, but they weren't just historical documents anymore. They were alive. The photographs, God, the photographs. The third-class passengers frozen in sepia-tone moments. They would shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Faces would turn slightly. Eyes would follow me. Not all of them, just select images, always the ones showing people who would die that night. Thomas's memories were no longer confined to dreams. I could taste the salt water during faculty meetings, feel the impossible cold of the Atlantic while lecturing about maritime engineering. Sometimes mid-sentence, I'd forget who I was. Was I the professor or the desperate young immigrant clutching a wooden panel in freezing water? The wound on my hand became a map, literally. Intricate blue-gray lines now formed a precise topographical representation of the Titanic's lower deck. If I traced the lines with my finger, I could feel the ship's internal layout. I could sense the exact location of each corridor, each compartment, the precise angles where water would first breach the hull. Dr. Moreau stopped calling. My department chair suggested a sabbatical. I was becoming something else. Something between a historian and a haunting. One night I discovered something in Thomas's memories that chilled me more than the phantom maritime cold that now perpetually surrounded me. He wasn't supposed to be on that ship. His original ticket, for a smaller vessel leaving a week earlier, had been lost, stolen, actually, by a man whose name was never recorded in any manifest, a man whose face Thomas remembered with a strange, specific terror, a man who seemed to know what was coming. The whispers grew more insistent, no longer just memories of terror and drowning, now they carried something else. A warning. He's coming. He's always been coming. I realized then that the haunting wasn't about the ship. It was about something much older, much darker. And I was just beginning to understand. Christmas came, and with it a strange peace. The whispers didn't stop, but they changed. Thomas's memories became less a torment and more a companionship. I understood now that he wasn't trying to possess me, he was trying to warn me. Dr. Elizabeth Moreau visited me on Christmas Eve. I hadn't seen her in months, and the concern in her eyes told me I looked as fractured as I felt. "I brought you something," she said, placing an old leather-bound journal on my desk. It was my grandmother's. She was a maritime historian, too. I thought, I thought you might appreciate it. The journal belonged to a researcher from the 1930s. Someone who had been investigating the Titanic long before modern technology made such research easier. As Elizabeth left, I opened the pages. Tucked between yellowed sheets was a photograph, not of the Titanic, not of any passenger. A man standing alone on a foggy pier, his face partially obscured, but familiar in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. The man from Thomas's stolen memory. That night, the wound on my hand, now a living map of maritime tragedy, began to speak differently. No longer desperate whispers of drowning, but something more measured, more intentional. Some stories are meant to be remembered. Some warnings must be carried. I think I understood then that Thomas's spirit wasn't a victim. He was a guardian. The cold that had haunted me for months began to recede, not completely, but enough that I could breathe. Enough that I could think clearly. Outside my window, snow fell. Pure. Silent. And for the first time since touching the artifact, I felt something like hope. The story wasn't over, but I wasn't afraid. At least, not completely. I worked in Gramps' shop for most of my life. It's been the first job for not just me, but all my siblings and most of my cousins. Grandpa runs a little pawn shop downtown, the kind of place that sells antiques as well as modern stuff. He does pretty well. I don't think I've ever seen him worry about paying rent or that he can afford to pay us kids better than any other place in the neighborhood. All the other kids quit on it after a while, but I enjoyed the work, and Grandpa always said I had a real knack for it. You keep at it, kid. Someday this old shop will be yours. Grandpa and I live above the shop. He offered me the spare room after Grandma died a few years back. It's been a pretty good arrangement. Every evening he turns on the radio, cracks a beer, we sit around, we drink. He tells me stories from back in the day. The radio never seemed to make any noise. I always asked him why he kept it around. Told me it was something that he'd had for a long time and that it was special. I asked how the old radio was special. He said that was a long story. If I had the time for it, I said. I didn't have anything else to do but sit here, listen to the rain, and Grandpa settling in as the old thing clicked and clunked in the background. Grandpa grew up in the early 60s. I mean, technically, he grew up in the 40s and 50s, but in a lot of his stories, it doesn't really seem like his life began until 1962. He describes it as one of the most interesting times of his life, and a lot of it's because of his father, my great-grandpa. He grew up in Chicago, and the town was just starting to get its feet under it after years of war and strife. His mother had died when he was 14, and his father opened a pawn shop with the money that he had gotten from her life insurance policy. Now, they weren't called pawn shops at that point. I think Grandpa said what my great-grandfather had was a brokerage or something. But all that mattered was that people came in, and they tried to sell him strange and wondrous things sometimes. Well, great-grandpa had run the place with his family, which consisted of my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and my great-uncle Terry. Great-great-grandma lived with him, but she didn't help out around the shop much. She had dementia, so she mostly stayed upstairs in her room as she knitted and waited to die. They lived above the shop in a little 3-bedroom flat. It was a little tight, Grandpa said, but they did all right. Grandpa worked at the pawn shop since he needed money to pay for his own apartment. And he said they got some of the strangest things sometimes, especially if his Uncle Terry was behind the counter. Uncle Terry was an odd duck, and that's coming from a family that wasn't quite strictly normal. Now, Dad usually buy things he knew he could sell easily. Appliances, tools, cars, furniture, that sort of thing. Uncle Terry, however, he would often buy things that were a little less easy to move. He bought a bunch of old movie props once from a guy who claimed they were genuine props from an old Bela Lugosi film. Dad lost his shit on them. Uncle Terry was also the one who bought that jewelry. Turned out to be stolen. Well, that was okay. As they turned it into the police, the reward was worth way more than they had spent on it. Terry was like a metronome. He'd make the worst choices, and then the best choices. And sometimes, they were the same choices all at once. So, of course, Terry had been the one who bought the radio. Well, Dad had been sick about a week. It had been bad enough the family had worried that he might not come back from it. Now, people in those times didn't always get over illness. Unless you had money to go see a doctor, you either got better or you didn't. He finally hacked it all up and got better and was ready to return to work, so he comes downstairs to the floor where Terry's sitting there and reading some kind of artsy-fartsy magazine. He looks over and sees they've taken a new radio. It was this big old German model, dark wood cabinet and dials. Looked like they were out of Frankenstein's lab. He thinks that looks pretty good, and he congratulates Terry, telling him everybody wants a good radio. Now it'll be real easy to sell. Now Terry looks over his magazine, tells him it ain't a radio. Dad asks him what the hell it is then. And Terry lays down the magazine, gives him the biggest, creepiest grin you've ever seen. It's a spirit radio, Terry announces like it's supposed to mean something. Now, I was working when Dad and Uncle Terry had that conversation. Dad just pinched the bridge of his nose, shook his head like he was trying not to bash Terry's skull in. After buying a bunch of counterfeit movie props, the guy and the Dad didn't even need an expert to tell him were fake. Uncle Terry had been put on a strict $100 a month budget of things that he could buy for the shop. Anything over $100 he had to go talk to Dad about. Dad hadn't had any visits from Uncle Terry, other than to bring him food in the last week. Dad knew that it either had cost less than $100 or Uncle Terry hadn't asked. How much this thing cost, Terry? Dad asked, clearly expecting to be angry. Now, Terry seemed to hedge a little. Nothing, Brian. The thing will pay for itself by the end of the month. You'll see, I'll show you the thing really is. How much? My dad asked, making it sound like a threat. $500. But, Brian, I've already made back 200 of that. Give me another week and I'll... But Dad had heard enough. You spent $500 on this thing. It better be gold-plated because $500 is a lot of money for a damn radio. But Terry tried to explain, but Dad wasn't having any of it. He told Terry to get out of the shop for a while. Otherwise, he's probably going to commit fratricide. And Terry suddenly remembered a friend that he had to see and made himself scarce. And then Dad rounds on me like I had something to do with it. And he asked how much Terry really spent on that thing. I told him he actually spent about $550 on it. Dad asked why in heaven's name no one had consulted him before spending such an astronomical sum. Now, the truth of the matter was, I was a little spooked by the radio. The guy had brought it in on a rainy afternoon, Dolly covered in an old blanket. And when he wheeled it up to the counter, I had come to see what he brought. And Terry was already there, reading, doing a lot of nothing. And he had perked up when the old guy told him that he had something miraculous to show him. I didn't care much for the old guy myself. He sounded foreign, East-West German. And his glass eye wasn't fooling anybody. So he whipped the quilt off the cabinet like a showman doing a trick, and there was a spirit radio, humming placidly before the front desk. Uncle Terry asked him what it was. The man said he'd be happy to demonstrate. So he took out a pocket knife, cut his finger, sprinkling the blood into a bowl of crystal on top of it. And the blood fell on the rocks. The dials began to glow. The thing hummed to life. Uncle Terry had started to tell the man that he didn't have to do that, but as it glowed and crooned, protest died on his lip. Spirit radio, man said. Who will win tomorrow's baseball game? The Phillies, the box intoned in a deep and unsettling voice. They'll defeat the Cubs 9-7. Uncle Terry looked ready to buy it on the spot, but when he asked what the man wanted for it, he balked a little at the price. Well, they dickered back and forth nearly an hour until they finally settled on $550. I could see Dad getting mad again, so I told him the rest of it too. Terry isn't wrong either. He's been using that spirit radio thing to bet on different stuff. The Phillies actually did win the game the next day, 9-7. And he's been making bets and collecting debts ever since. He's paid the store back $200. But I know he's won more than that. His dad still looked mad. But he looked intrigued, too. Dad didn't put a lot of stock in weirdness, but he understood money. I saw him look at the spirit radio, look at the bowl of crystal on top of it. When he dug out his old buck knife, I turned away before I could see him slice himself. He grunted and squeezed a few drops over the bowl. When the radio purred to life, I turned back to see it glowing. And an eerie blue glow. The dials softly admitting light through foggy glass, and it always made me shiver when I watched it. And to this day, I think those were spirits, ghosts, of those who had used it, but who knows? Dad hesitated, maybe sensing what I had sensed too, and when he spoke, his voice quavered for the first time that I could remember. Who'll win the first raise at the dog track tomorrow? Yeah. The radio softly hummed, contemplated, and finally whispered, Mama's boy will win the first race of the day at Olsen Park track tomorrow. And Dad rubbed his face, and I hear a scrub of stubble on his palm. He thought about it, resting a hand on the box. I went to the register to see what we had made while he was gone. When Uncle Terry came back, Dad handed him an envelope, told him to shut up when he tried to explain himself. He said, you'll be at Olsen Park track tomorrow for the first race. You'll take the money in the envelope. And I'll bet every cent of it on Mama's boy to win the first race. And you'll bring me all the winnings back. And if you lose that money, I'll put this thing in the window. I'll sell it as a regular radio, and you'll never be allowed to purchase anything for the shop again. Said He said, and if he wins? And Terry had asked, but Dad didn't answer. Grandpa took a sip of his beer then and got a faraway look as he contemplated. That was just how Grandpa told stories. He always looked like he was living in the times when he was talking about. And I suppose in a lot of ways he was. Going back to the 1960s. The most interesting time of his young life. To a time when he encountered something he couldn't quite explain. So, did he win? I asked. Invested now, as we sat in the apartment above the shop, drinking beer and watching it rain. Oh yeah, Grandpa said. He won. And when Uncle Terry came back with the money, I think Dad was as surprised as Terry was. Terry had been using it, but it always felt like he was operating on the idea that it was some kind of monkey's paw situation. After a while, there'd be an accounting for what he had won. When a month went by, however, and there was no downside to using the radio, Terry got a bit more comfortable. He started asking other things, the results of boxing matches, horse race, sporting events, and anything else that he could use to make money. It got so bad that his fingers started to look like a pin cushion. Started cutting into his palms, his arms. It seemed like more blood equaled better results, and sometimes you could get a play-by-play. If you bled more for it. Dad would use it sparingly, still not liking to give it its blood. But Uncle Terry was adamant about it. There was a mania in him, and even though it hurt him, he used it a lot. He could always be seen hanging around the radio, talking to it and feeding it. Dad didn't like the method, but he liked the money it brought in. Now, the shop was doing better than ever, thanks to the cash injection from the spirit radio. And Dad was buying better things to stock it with. He bought some cars, luxury electronics. There was always a net gain to the store once they sold. Times were good. Everyone was doing well. That's when Uncle Terry took it too far. He brought the bottle to his mouth, but didn't quite make it. It seemed to get stuck halfway there, the contents spilling on his undershirt as he watched the rain. He jumped when the cold liquid touched him and righted it, putting it down before laughing at himself. He shook the drops off his shirt and looked back at the rain, running his tongue over his dry lips. One night we tied on a few too many. My uncle, he had this really serious look in his face. He staggered downstairs despite Dad yelling at him, asking where he was going. When he started yelling, we ran downstairs to see what was going on, and we leaned over to the spirit box, tip of his finger dribbling as he yelled at it. He held it out, and the blood fall into the crystal dish on top of the radio as it came to life. He put his ruddy face very close to the wooden cabinet and blistered out his question, clearly not for the first time. When will I die? The radio was silent, lights blinking, but it didn't return an answer. He cut another finger asking the same question, but it never returned an answer. Before we could stop it, he split his palm almost to the wrist as the blood dribbled into the stone. He nearly screamed his question at it. When will I die? Spirit radio still said nothing. And Dad and I had to restrain him before he could do it again. Now, we don't know what brought this on. We never found out. But Uncle Terry became very interested in death. More specifically, when he was going to die. I don't know, maybe all this spirit talk got him thinking. Maybe he was afraid that one day his voice was going to come out of that radio. Whatever the case, Dad put a stop to using it. He hid the thing. He had to keep moving it because Uncle Terry always found it again. He'd hide it for a day or two, but eventually we'd find him, bleeding from his palms, pressing his face against it. Sometimes I could hear him whispering to it like it was talking back to him. I didn't like those times. It was creepy. But Uncle Terry was attached to it at the hip. It went on for about a month, and Uncle Terry did something unforgettable. And he got his answer. He watched the rain for a moment longer, his teeth chattering a little as he was trying to get the sound out of his head. Grandpa didn't much care for the rain. I had known him to close the shop if it got really bad, and it always seemed to make him extremely uncomfortable. That's why we're sitting up here in the first place, and I believe that Grandpa would have liked to be drinking something a little stronger. Dad and I got a call about something big, something he always wanted. It was an old armoire, antique from the Civil War era. The guy selling it, at least according to Dad, is asking way less than it was worth. He wanted me to come along to help move it, said that he didn't feel like Terry would be any use to it. He'd been flaky lately, obsessed with that damn radio, wouldn't even leave the house. To say that Terry had been flaky was an understatement. Uncle Terry had been downright weird. He never left the shop, just kept looking for the radio. I started to notice a weird smell coming around the house. I suspected he wasn't bathing. I never saw him eat or sleep. He just hunted for the radio, fettered his blood when he found it. But Dad had always asked him. Terry said he was busy, so Dad told him to keep an eye on his mother. Mother, my great-great-grandmother, had been suffering from dementia for years. Dad and Uncle Terry decided to keep an eye on her instead. Instead of just putting her in a home. And Terry agreed. As we left the house, the rain had started to come down. That's what I always remember about that day. The way the rain came down in buckets, the sky was crying. What was about to happen. We got the armoire into the trailer. The guy had a thick old quilt he put over it to stop it from getting wet. When we got back to the shop, we brought it in and left it in the back room. And Dad was smiling. Knew he had something special here. He was excited to see what he could get for it. We both squished as we went upstairs to get fresh clothes on, joking about the trip until we got to the landing. And Dad put out his hand. His nostrils flared as he sniffed. I could smell it too. I couldn't identify it at the time. Dad must have recognized it because he burst into the apartment like a cop looking for dope. Uncle Terry was sitting in the living room, his hands red, his knees getting redder by the minute. He was rocking back and forth, spirit radio glowing beside him. He repeated the same thing over and over again. He had found it whenever Dad had hidden it. He'd clearly been up to his old tricks again. Dad stood over him as he rocked, his fist tightened, like he wanted to hit him. When he growled at him, I took a step away, sensing the rage that was building up there. "What have you done?" he said. "Today. It's today. Today. It's today." Terry kept right on repeating it, rocking back and forth as he sobbed to himself. My Dad turned the bowl on top of the spirit radio. He must have not liked what he saw. I saw it later, after everything had come next. It was just full of blood. Crystals were swimming in it, practically floating in the thick red blood. Dad seemed to be doing the math. There was more blood than a finger prick or a palm cut. Dad was clearly getting worried, given that Terry was still conscious. He said, "Where's Mom?" His voice low and dangerous. "Today, it's today." "Where's our mother, Terry?" Dad yelled, leaning down to grab him by the collar, pull him up. Uncle Terry had blood on his hands, up to the elbows, but instead of dripping off onto the floor, it stayed caked on him in thick, dry patches. Shaking seemed to have brought him out of his haze. It said if I wanted the answer, I had to sacrifice, Terry said, his voice cracking. It said I had to give up something important if I wanted to know something so important, something I loved. The others weren't enough. I didn't even know them, but my mother was... He stopped. He stopped stammering when Dad wrapped his hands around his throat. He choked him, shook him violently as he screamed wordlessly into his dying face, and when he dropped him, Uncle Terry didn't move. Dad and I just stood there for a second. Dad seemed to remember that I was there at all. When he caught sight of the softly glowing radio, the subject of my uncle's obsession, he pivoted, lifted his foot to kick the thing, and I could tell he meant to destroy it. To not stop kicking until it was splinters on the floor, but something stopped him. Whether it was regret for what he had done or some otherworldly force, my dad found himself unable to strike the cabinet. Maybe he was afraid of letting the spirits out, and I would never know. Instead, he went to call the police so they could come and collect the bodies. He might also collect him, but he didn't talk about that as we sat in silence until they arrived. Dad told the police my uncle had admitted to killing their mother, and he had killed him in a blind rage. They went to the back room, confirmed my grandmother was dead. Dad didn't tell me until he lay dying of cancer years later, but Terry had cut her heart out. Offered it to the bowl on top of the radio. We assume he did at least, because we never found any evidence of it in the house or in the bowl. It was never discovered. Police believe it had to have it ground up. They also discovered the bodies of 3 homeless men rotting in the back of Terry's closet. He had bled them. Something that had stained the wood in that room so badly, they had to replace it. How he'd done all that without anyone noticing, we had no idea. He had to have been luring them in while we were out doing other things. And if it hadn't been for my grandmother's death being directly linked to him, I truly believe Dad would have been as much of a suspect as Uncle Terry. And they took the bodies away. They took the bowl away. Well, they returned it later. I ended up moving in with Dad. He got kind of depressed after the whole thing and helped to have someone here with him. I've lived here ever since. Eventually taking over the business. You pretty much know the rest. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the rain come down and the static from the old radio as it crackled amicably. Have you ever used the radio? A little afraid of the answer. Grandpa shook his head. I saw what it did to Uncle Terry and to a lesser degree what it did to my dad. I've run the shop since his death and I did it without the radio. Then why keep it? I asked, looking at the old thing a little differently now. Oh, because like Dad, I can't bring myself to destroy it. I won't sell it to someone else that can ruin their life too. When the shop's yours, it'll be your burden. Choice of what to do with it'll be up to you. I couldn't help but watch the radio, seeing it differently than I had earlier. As we sat drinking, I thought I could hear something under the sound of rain. It sounded like a low, melancholy moan that came sliding from the speakers like a whispered scream. Was my great-uncle's voice in there? Somewhere? I suppose. One day, I might find out. Emma was an extrovert, but she hadn't always been one. I suppose it's my fault that we drifted apart in the end. The truth is, I fell for all that bullshit. I listened to that voice, the sneering one that nipped at the back of my ears with its sharp incisors, the one that asked, "Why is your only friend a girl?" I fell for the indoctrination every 12-year-old boy does, and it wasn't like she was a tomboy either. She was a real, proper girl, complete with The star and heart-shaped hair clips, sweeping blonde bangs, posters of horses, boy bands all over her purple painted walls. She liked fairies, she liked unicorns. I liked her anyways. She was funny. She always asked me questions. She always shared. She was quiet around others. Her long face always pointed down at her shoes, but she wasn't like that with me. It was my fault we drifted apart, but I couldn't stand how they looked at us, all of them, when we were playing together next to the basketball courts. I didn't like how the girls scoffed, how the boys shouted things like I couldn't quite make out, and then shoved each other, laughing uproariously. But the worst were the adults. I saw the looks that they gave each other when Emma and I showed up to class side by side. Secret looks. But I knew what they meant. Hope we get invited to the wedding, right? So I stopped hanging out with Emma. I made new friends, boys who liked soccer and spitting contests, and the looks and whispers stopped. And Emma stayed alone. That was until high school. When we got to high school, I started to notice that Emma had changed. At lunch, when I went out to the front lawn with my friends to toss a frisbee back and forth like a wannabe college kid, I started to see her with other people. And when I passed through the halls, I saw her with boys leaning against lockers, laughing and placing her hand on their shoulders. Every day, it seemed like there were more people, more friends, surrounding her like a school of fish, a shipwreck. This wouldn't be unusual, except that Emma was always such a small, timid girl. She'd been a loner since she was tiny. This was when I truly realized I didn't know who she was anymore. I didn't necessarily miss her anymore. It had been years since we had so much as spoken to each other, but it still gave me a strange pang in my chest to think it. Emma was an extrovert now, I realized. She was nice to everyone. A huge smile was always pulling at her glossy lips. Her hair was always perfect, falling in little swoops at her shoulders. She wore bright pinks and oranges and blues in the form of tight skirts and frilly blouses. She was attractive to the boys in an approachable way, but so nice to the girls that she was never considered a threat, just a friend. And even from a distance, I could observe that everyone liked Emma. How could you not like Emma? At graduation, I looked for her. While I was accepting my fake diploma up on the stage, my friends and family cheered for me from the sea of faces. I searched the crowd for Emma. I spotted her quickly near the back. Someone was talking to her animatedly. It was a girl with a tight brown ponytail and braces, and she was smiling, a strange smile, but she wasn't responding. Instead, she stared straight forward. I felt my face get a little hot. Was she looking at me? Should I wave or something? But when I squinted my eyes, I could tell that it wasn't me she was looking at. She was looking somewhere behind me. After the ceremony, I looked for her again. I tried to part the mass of bodies, muttering excuse me's and sorries as I went. She was surrounded by a throng of her peers, all speaking so loudly and cheerfully that I couldn't make out anything she was saying. I got a glimpse of her face for a split second. She was smiling in that same strange way, almost sad. I finally heard her say something, her pink lips parting like they were crumpled up as if she was crying. I'm gonna miss you all so, so much. And then came college. Emma and I ended up at the same school, one that was far enough away from home to feel like a grown-up, but not far enough away to actually be one. In college, I saw her less, so I thought of her less. College was much bigger than high school, and I had much more to think about than my old childhood friend. But when I did see Emma, things seemed the same. always surrounded by people, always smiling. I made new friends. I tried out for the soccer team. I made it. My grades were okay, B to C average. And my roommate was weird, but he always left me alone. I felt content with the little life that I've been building. That was until the party. It was by no means the first college party of the year, nor the craziest. I was told it would be just a couple of friends at one of the houses on campus, being rented out by seniors. But in typical college party fashion, it got out of hand pretty quickly. I went with a couple of my own friends, and we mostly stayed in the kitchen, crammed into the corner with mystery drinks clutched in our hands. The whole place reeked of smoke, and all the light bulbs had been changed to colored ones, giving the house almost an eerie nightclub vibe. It wasn't anything special, but feeling the warm buzz brought on by a mixed drink in a red plastic cup, crouched in a stranger's kitchen with new friends, I was feeling pretty good. I knew when Emma got there, I could claim I sensed it, like it was some sort of psychic superpower. But I just knew by the chatter. The air suddenly felt livelier. The people funneled from the kitchen to the living room, calling out greetings. My friends and I used the temporary quiet in the kitchen to get ourselves fresh drinks. And then we filed out to the porch to smoke. My warm feeling only grew, and soon I was laughing so hard I felt I might piss myself, elbowing my friends in the way that's only okay when you're drunk. The music thumped from inside the house, muted by the sliding glass door, and I didn't even feel the cold. When we finally decided to go back inside, I was surprised to find the kitchen entirely empty. I frowned and checked my phone. It was only around midnight. Why would everyone be gone? And that was when I heard someone shout from the other room, and my friends and I eyed each other. I felt a guilty twinge at how excited the prospect of a fight breaking out made me, but I wanted stories. I wanted the college experience. So we all rushed into the living room, and that's when I saw her. Emma was on the table, and everyone in the room was facing her as if she were a caged animal in the zoo. She was on her hands and knees, but in a way that told me she hadn't been standing up before. Clutching a clear bottle in one hand and the edge of the table with the other, I watched horrified as she retched over the side, wobbling back and forth like a swaying ship. Everyone shouted in dismay and crashed backwards towards the wall, wanting to avoid the splash zone, and I was very nearly forced out of the room. "No," she moaned, wiping at her mouth with the back of her hand. The bottle clanked against her shirt buttons. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Clearly, she had had too much to drink, and I wondered what I had missed before I'd come in. My friends were laughing, nudging each other and me, but I didn't join them. Emma kneeled over, flopping pathetically on the table, as someone shouted, "Get down!" Their voice brash and cruel. Someone else laughed. Someone else started taking pictures of her. I'd never seen her like this, and I had never seen anyone be mean to Emma, not since middle school at least. I like to think I saw her wet skirt before anyone else did. At least, I hope that's true. I would hate for everyone there to remember their last time seeing her alive as her slumped over on someone's table, pee trickling down her legs and pooling at her hip, hugging an empty bottle like a teddy bear. I shoved through the crowd on an instinct, ignoring my friends' questioning shouts trailing after me. I reached Emma in a few seconds, gently trying to pry the bottle from her hand and pull her from the table. She finally acknowledged me when I scooped her up into my arms, wincing at the wetness soaking through I like to think I saw her wet skirt before anyone else did. At least, I hope that's true. I'd hate for everyone there to remember their last time seeing her alive as her slumped over on someone's table, hugging an empty bottle like a teddy bear. I shoved through the crowd on instinct, ignoring my friends' questioning shouts trailing after me. I reached Emma in a few seconds, gently trying to pry the bottle from her hands and pull her from the table. She finally acknowledged me when I scooped her up into my arms, wincing at the wetness soaking through my shirt sleeves. Her eyes fluttered open and she stared up at me. Her eyes glazed over. Andrew? She slurred. I nodded, my face made of stone. The people all around us let out a collective "Ooh!" And I was back in middle school, letting go of Emma's hand, refusing to look her in the eye. I looked her in the eye then, though, and she smiled in that sad way that only I seemed to ever notice. And then she threw up on my shirt. I got her to the bathroom and locked it behind us as thralls of people pounded against her with their fists, chanting our names. Emma! Andrew! Emma! Andrew! We've become the most interesting thing at the party, I thought. We've become the spectacle. Emma sobbed as I helped her into the bathtub, figuring it would be the easiest to clean off later. Emma's head fell back against the tile and she groaned. I silently slipped off my shirt and scrubbed at it in the bathroom sink, choking back my own bile as I did. I wasn't drunk anymore, or at least I didn't feel it. Andrew, she whispered after a long time. I looked over at her. She had pushed her blonde hair away from her eyes, stringy with spit and vomit. She stared up at me, watery and trembling. Yeah, Emma? I gave up on my shirt and sighed, shaking it out and pulling it back on. I shuddered at how it clung to my skin. I'm sorry. It's okay, Emma. I closed the toilet seat so I could sit on top of it next to where she was laying. You okay? She shook her head quickly, then slower. Her eyes opened wide, and I recognized something new in them. Fear. I've ruined everything, she whispered, frantic, her voice frayed. I frowned and leaned closer, wanting to hear her. What do you mean, you ruined everything? Maybe I wanted to... I don't know. She buried her face in her hands, whimpering into them. Maybe I meant to, Andrew. Maybe I'm sick of this. Maybe I can't do this anymore. Do what anymore? I pleaded, a little bit alarmed. She was rocking back and forth now, her breath coming in raspy wisps. She peeked at me from between her fingers now, as if she were surveying me. She hiccuped, and that somehow triggered a new wave of blubbering sobs, tears dripping from her chin like fat raindrops. I used to be so jealous of you, she sniveled, wiping at her red nose. I had so many friends, and I couldn't have any of them, and then I was jealous of you because you didn't have to have any. My eyebrows furrowed almost a painful amount, and I searched her face, unsure if I should feel offended by this or not. The pounding on the door continued. Emma! Emma! What do you mean, Emma? I don't understand. Her eyes glazed over, her tears still falling, and she stared through me at the bathroom door, half there, half not. It follows me, she whispered. So weak I could barely hear her, her breathing quickened. What follows you? She shook her head and pulled at her hair. Finally, her eyes met mine again, as if she were phasing back into reality. It's in them, she spit, jabbing a finger at the door. It's in all of them. It's watching me, always. It always knows when I don't have any friends, it gets angry. Emma! 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 I could do nothing but stare at her, trying to figure out if she was serious or not. She must have been pretty drunk, but right then she seemed stone cold sober. I have to have friends, she continued, the tears never slowing down. I've done all my research. I wear the right clothes. I go to their houses and I peek through their windows. I know what they like, what they don't like. I have a binder. Everyone I meet is in my binder. Everyone has to like me, Andrew, or it'll kill me. I know it will. It gets closer every time I lose a friend. It started with you. I felt suddenly very cold. I heard the words she wasn't saying. You were the very first friend I ever lost. I thought of her at graduation, staring at something that wasn't there behind me, that strange smile on her face. And I started to believe her. Emma! 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 And now they all hate me, she sobbed bitterly, hugging herself. I did it to myself, all of that work, and one night, one mistake is going to kill me. It's going to kill me now. It's going to kill me. No, it isn't, I heard myself say. I knelt next to her, catching her franticness like a cold. No, it's not. You're safe in here. It's going to kill me, she mumbled. I wasn't sure if she even heard me. All that work, and it's going to kill me. You're safe in here, and I'm your friend. I'm still your friend. I reached out and I took her hand. Her skin was white and cold, as if she was already dead. Emma! 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 The voices had all morphed into one horrific amalgamation. The door hinges creaked and shuddered, like they were only just clinging on. The lock rattled. Emma let out a little shriek. Without thinking about it, I climbed into the tub with her and pulled the curtain shut. I didn't care anymore about getting any of her bodily fluids on me. Besides, it was too late for that anyway. She stared at me. Her eyes looked almost gray, and they were shiny, flickering with something I had never seen before. It'll happen to you next, she told me, her voice solemn. I don't know how I know, but I do. I'm sorry, Andrew. It's okay, Emma. For what it's worth, I wish we stayed like we were. She scooted closer to me, resting her head on my shoulder at an awkward angle. I do too. And then, the bathroom door gave way. When the police arrived, I told them the truth. I didn't know what else to say. I was far too out of it to make up a story, so. After hours of interrogation and psych evaluation, I was finally released to go home and scrub her blood off of me. Probably because it was impossible to fathom how I, one boy, could possibly do to her what was done to her. It brought me no relief. A week later, I went to her old house. It was a 2-hour drive away, about a block away from my old house. Her mom was there. She let me in, teary-eyed. She remembered me. Would you mind if I went through her things a bit? I asked. My voice gentle, but I couldn't force much emotion into it. I was still reeling from what I had experienced at that party. I think there's something she wanted me to have. Her mother nodded and led me to her room. It was exactly how I remembered it. Purple wallpaper, adorned with various brightly colored posters, unicorn figurines, stuffed animals covering the bed and the carpet. Untouched. She had still been such a little loser. Even in high school, when I thought she was cool. I rifled through her drawers until I found it. A purple binder. I almost smiled at the butterfly stickers decorating the surface, one scratch away from peeling off completely. I flipped through it, slowly. She hadn't lied. She really did do her research. Everyone from our high school was there. Their pictures taped haphazardly next to lists. lists, things about them. Things that Emma never should have even known. She'd been trying desperately to save her own life. When I got to my own entry, I hesitated. There was significantly less content on my page, as if she'd decided it wasn't even worth it. My picture, cut straight out of the yearbook, seemed to look right at me. A thought flashed in my head, then burning behind my eyelids, and tears began to form. I wiped them away quickly, alarmed. You are so alone. And somewhere far away, I could hear it, pounding against wood, chanting, Andrew, Emma, Andrew, Emma, Andrew, Emma, Andrew, Emma. Day 1. I keep having nightmares that I'm trapped in a box. These came out of nowhere, and I've never had a recurring dream more than 2 days in a row. Something's always different, but these nightmares, they're all exactly the same. So I'm starting this diary or the dream journal. In these dreams, I'm in a box, but it's all kind of blurry, like when you try throwing a punch in a dream and it moves in slow motion. That's how it's been every single time, 4 nights in a row. I read that having a dream journal helps you lucid dream, so I can slowly manipulate my dreams with practice. If these dreams continue, I should be able to change them eventually. Day 2. Same dream again last night. I feel like the dream's actually becoming a bit clearer. I'm not positive, so I'm not going to get my hopes up. Day 3. The dreams are definitely becoming clearer. I have no idea this dream journal idea would actually work at all, much less so quickly. So I've been reading up on dreams more and decided to set an alarm so that I could catch myself waking up in the middle of REM cycles. This should make it so my dreams become more lucid. Day 3 continued. Well, I tried setting multiple alarms to keep falling asleep and waking up, but I'm just not really tired today. I'll set an alarm and wake up earlier tomorrow, so I'm sleepier during the day. Day 4. I feel too well rested again. My apartment's starting to feel a little small, ironically. It's 500 square feet, so it's not huge, but it's enough for one person, and I did decide to get rid of a few extra throw pillows, extra being the key word. It's probably just a side effect of the dreams. Feeling like I'm stuck in a box every night isn't great. It never lasts long, but it's right before I wake up, so it's always still so, vivid in my mind. Oh. Day 5. Okay, major breakthrough. I was finally able to move around while stuck in the box. It's very uncomfortable. It's definitely made of cardboard, but, that's progress. You can even hear a slight white noise in the background. That was all, though. I woke up and for once didn't want the nightmare to end. I just love seeing progress. Looking forward to tomorrow. Day 6. Honestly, who even invented throw pillows? I got rid of all the ones I had. My bed looks so nice and clean, optimal for dreaming. I could smell the cardboard last night. Day 7. Everything's surprisingly clear in the dream now. I could feel the cardboard, and it's pretty solid. There's not much give at all. I don't have any way to get out. I'm too cramped to kick or punch. I don't have any blade or anything. I think with enough lucid dreaming I could conjure one, but at that point, would I just be able to dream the box magically opening? And maybe I could give myself laser vision, and just burn through it. Too much Superman on the brain lately. Day 8. I thought day 7 would mark 1 week, but technically day 8 would be 1 week, right? I'm not sure. I realize the dreams become more lucid when I get rid of things, and honestly my apartment's been feeling small ever since day 4, so my stuff isn't too expensive, so I'll just get rid of a bunch of things. It's kind of funny. Day 9. Nothing different in this dream. I'm still unable to move or do anything. The white noise sounds sort of like an engine or something. It's a low hum. I don't know if realizing more things about it will help me escape, but I mean, it can't hurt, right? I'll just focus on everything I can during the dreams. Day 10. Maybe I've been going about this wrong. Maybe I need to force another dream instead of trying to change this one when it happens. Time to focus all of my efforts today on one thing. Cooking. The mix of smells and tastes, that'll make my day very memorable, so hopefully my dreams will have me in a kitchen. Day 11. I woke up screaming today. I didn't have a different dream. And this time, I felt like I could barely breathe, like the air in the box was running out. I screamed in the dream, and then I screamed in real life. I mean, not the wisest tactic when you're running out of air, but it's not like I had much control over these dreams. I can't even control myself sometimes. My apartment was feeling a little stuffy, so I got rid of my couch and some spare blankets and towels. More open air, that should help. Day 12. The dreams are the same every night, but honestly, my real life is starting to feel like a nightmare. I keep feeling like my apartment's getting smaller. I got rid of some more stuff today, just, things I don't need. It wore me out, so I'm going to go ahead and go sleep early tonight. Day 13. The issue seems to be my big furniture taking up so much space. My TV stand, bookshelf, desks. I got rid of them all. And it's not feeling as cramped, but I don't know how my apartment feels so small. Nothing different in the dream. I'm constantly trying to escape with no way out. Focusing on making things apparate just doesn't work. Day 14. Got rid of my shower curtain today. My floor gets more wet now, but when I was taking showers, it was feeling too cramped. Luckily, I have a washer-dryer unit in my closet, so I can reuse my towels as needed. Who would have known those spares would have been missed? Smelled a little oil in that dream today. Day 15. I swear, my apartment is still getting smaller. I have no idea how. With the big furniture items gone, I'm unable to comprehend how I even fit them in here. I'm gonna try sleeping on the floor tonight and see if I can get rid of my bed too. Day 16. The dream was the same. And I slept surprisingly fine. The bed's already gone at the time of writing this. All the small things I kept in the bookshelf, desks, etc., they've been in storage containers, but I haven't really accessed them in a while. I mean, they're taking up space, so those are gone too. Day 17. I was doing a load of laundry today, and when I turned around, my closet, it felt incredibly tiny. So I took a hammer to the walls, right? And now it's an open wardrobe laundry area. My bedroom's a lot bigger thanks to that. Well, my security deposit's definitely gone. Whoops. On a side note, I think I'm developing, or have already developed, claustrophobia to a degree that it should be treated by a professional. I've already scheduled a meeting with a psychiatrist. Bringing up this dream seems like a good idea too, right? It's time to get an expert's analysis on it. Day 18. Well, I took out my bedroom wall today, right after I woke up. I calmed down after, but it felt like I couldn't control myself. This obviously isn't sustainable, and I'm definitely gonna have to pay a lot when I move out, but I really need to worry about my mental health issues first. Future me can figure the finances out. Day 19. I figured that I'd done plenty of damage already, so a little more wouldn't harm much, right? So I coaxed myself into getting rid of the washer, dryer, fridge, range, and cabinets. Took a lot of straps, pulling, pushing, sliding, probably damage on my spine that I just can't feel since I'm young. Somehow I did it. I don't recommend trying it yourself, but I bet anyone actually could if they wanted to. surprisingly painless, or I'm surprisingly strong. I feel great. I have the psychiatrist appointment in 2 days. I wonder if I would have kept my things had it already happened. Day 20. My room's basically one big, empty room now. I've been sleeping on the pile of what few clothes I still have. I have this journal, my phone, the internet. What else does someone else these days really need? I know I should be concerned, but when I woke up this morning, I was feeling so anxious and cramped. It was so bad that now I feel so relaxed. It's literally crazy, I know, but that's what tomorrow's psychiatrist appointment's for. All these changes in my life actually make me appreciative of the dream, since it remains the same. Day 23. It's been a few days since I last wrote. On what would have been day 21, I woke up feeling extremely cramped. I felt like I was almost in the box in my dream. My shower felt like it was almost reachable from where I was sleeping. As a matter of fact, everything in my room felt like I could almost touch it. I had no idea this was what people with claustrophobia felt like. I went to the psychiatrist, and they were afraid of what would happen the next few days as the room would keep getting smaller in my head. They weren't sure what I would do when cornered. They suggested a hospital that they know really well, and I've been here since. There was a 48-hour hold before I could have my journal. They gave us tasks, activities to do. Honestly, everybody here is... they seem to have it worse than me. You know, a few people are very depressed, otherwise normal in social situations, so they're the ones that I really talk to. My room it's extremely nice, accommodating. My wall's basically a giant window. I can see things happening outside at all times of day. And I've been having the dream in the box, but my waking hours are much more peaceful now. I turn my journal in every day so that they can read what I'm writing. I don't actually have to do this, but they asked if I would, and I don't mind. I'm not really crazy in any other way, so it's fine if people read this. Day 27. They asked if I wanted my journal each of the last few days, and I said no, because honestly, there hadn't been much of an update. Dream's been the same, but the reason I'm writing this now is because the room has been feeling smaller. I mean, I kind of feel like I'm in a fish tank. Yeah, they let us go outside a lot, but it's not like I can camp out under the stars, I guess. Because this is kind of my plea for help, too. Hey, doctor, figure something out. Just kidding. Kind of. Day 28. They put stars in my room. Those glow-in-the-dark ones that people have as a kid, I don't know, it's a sweet gesture. I hope it helps. Day 29. It does not. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I guess the stars had lost their charge from the daylight because my room was dark. Felt incredibly small, almost like the box. Day 37. They wanted to see if my journal could have been an issue, so we went a week without it, which is fine. Really just trying anything to get better. Something really bad happened, so they decided I could have my journal back. I punched and slammed my head into the wall repeatedly because I felt like it was closing in. They both bled. A lot. And I lost some hair, but I didn't feel like I had a choice. I didn't want to get crushed by the walls. My body sort of just moved on its own. My room feels like a tiny little fishbowl during the day. And the box at night. I was having a hard time distinguishing my dreams from reality this past week. I think I figured it out, though. The expression, pinch me, I must be dreaming. It's accurate. Pain is the key. I just wished my hands and head hurt. Instead of the box being so uncomfortable. My teachers used to force us to exchange love notes. You know, we were given lists of everyone in class and made to spend money on themed boxes of cards which had these uncomfortable personal sayings. Be mine. Someone likes you. You're so pretty. I love you so much. The idea was to be anonymous in our delivery, but when 25 kids and they're all stumbling over each other in a room meant to handle 15, it's not exactly a discreet process. Some kids went home with lollipops, expertly fashioned to the cards, and a few enthusiastic parents made goodie bags with Pez dispensers and colored paper, sacrifices to the elite of our class. One kid never got anything. Despite the lists and the rules against discrimination, and the fact that she was always nice to everyone, there was always one desk left horribly, obviously bare. I always told myself I didn't mind. But that was elementary school, when the ultimate display of affection was pushing each other on the swings, and at some point down the line people discovered how to order boutiques of roses and perfected the art of making out in full view and way of everyone except the teachers. I guess cards are sort of obsolete. But people get other things, mostly fluffy, button-eyed things with bows, like nooses around their necks. The fact that those things never used to make it to me is my own fault, and I know that. I know I should be more outgoing, or prettier, or just better. But it's more comforting to blame everyone else instead. That's the kind of mood I was in. Early last week, when I was sitting in my polka dot bed scrolling through frilly websites complete with gifs of dogs chewing heart-shaped treats. Not because I was bitter or anything, just that Valentine's Day was coming up and I had to do a love letter for creative writing. Fishing for inspiration, even if resentment was the only fish biting. I clicked a random link and a brightly colored interface popped up. It was a flat red with a few sparse graphics, the title, and a button beaming "Sign Up Today." A character was posed on the top of the screen looking up at the button. It was impossible to tell if it was a baby or a child. Its head was swollen out and up with a masculine torso and 4 fat limbs. Tufts of blonde hair swooped over huge blue eyes, and everything about it, from its blue clothes to its red skin, was grossly oversaturated. The title was Instant Valentine. Curious, I hovered over the sign-up button, not sure what I was expecting. Part of me thought it was going to be a joke. That text would flash calling me a loser and somehow add me to a public spreadsheet of how many others had clicked the link. I clicked it anyway. And instead of a form popping up, asking for an email and a name, bad as this is going to sound, I never really cared about giving away my email to sites like this. I did it often enough at malls to get Wi-Fi, and with those sketchy grade saver websites. I figured as long as I never put my real name, I wasn't really giving up anything. Oh, now I know better. I typed in my email, and an alias that I spent 30 seconds choosing. Gwen. It's the name I used to wish I had, from when Ben 10 was my favorite show in the world. A minute later, I got a notification and checked my email, again expecting an advert or a punchline. Well, I transcribed it here. To Gwen. You light my life. Be mine? There was no sender. The email was just the site name and a string of numbers. I opened the attachment and found a drawing of a little girl holding a candle. It looked like the first mascot. Too red and lumpy, like those vintage cherub kids. Some kind of gushy mailing list? It's cool. I closed the email and went to bed a while later, secretly excited by the digital admirer. This was last week. The next morning, I checked my email again, and there was another note from the instant Valentine. Gwen, you look sweet enough to eat. Be my Valentine. Attached was another old-timey drawing of a girl sitting in a comically large cauldron, an open fire beneath. I know it's dumb, but something about the note was reassuring. There was something to look forward to, for one, but there were also windows into another world. Gwen's world. The notes kept coming. All of them came with drawings, increasingly saturated. A pirate shoving a gooey hook through a girl's heart. Let's hook up, girl. Be mine? A Betty Boop type with rubber-hosed legs and a melting pile around her, bright flames eating away at her skin. You're hot stuff, Valentine. Be mine? A little devil holding a pitchfork with hearts at the tips. Only her expression was twisted with pain, and the horns and tail looked surgically attached. I love you from hell and back. Be mine. At first, the art was charming in a weird way, stuff that you'd find in a garage sale or in an attic, but as the week progressed, they only got more graphic. I tried to Google the pictures by description, hoping to find the artist, and they came up empty. I Googled Instant Valentine. Nothing relevant. I couldn't even find the original site anymore, and I didn't remember the random series of clicks that got me there in the first place. But I wasn't too worried. More curious than anything, I didn't even realize how much I enjoyed the daily acknowledgement until some girls from class asked if I even had a boyfriend yet. As I walked away from them, I wondered why I'd said yes. The days passed. I started filling out Gwen's world a bit. I imagined her as a perfect version of me, taller, smoother skin, a smile like Gatsby and a voice like Daisy. Gwen was confident, and everyone wanted to be her Valentine. I even created a persona for the note giver. I called him Josh, and he grew inside my head as a shy, artsy kid who had been in love with Gwen since they were kids. Love you, dear. Be mine. Gwen's friends recoiled from the bloodied carcass of a girl wearing a sexy deer costume painted across the page, but she knew it was special. I gained another reason to hate Valentine's Day. I knew the notes would probably stop then. But sometime in the next few days, the notes started to change. They stopped being addressed to Gwen, and they started being addressed to me. I spent an hour trying to find out how it, knew my name. My lame conclusion was that it could read other emails in my inbox, although I'm still not sure. The thought chilled me, but there wasn't a way to cancel the subscription. I couldn't even reply to the email. So I did nothing, waiting for the issue to resolve itself. The cheesy pickup lines thinned out, replaced them with constant emails, several per day, with just 2 words. Be mine? Be mine. Be mine. The drawings were still there, but they were wrong somehow, like the ink was running. Smudged and blackened faces screaming at me from my computer screen. Always different girls. One was wearing a bikini or underwear, and her head was submerged in a bathtub. Another chubbier girl had on a pig costume and was roasting over a spit with an apple between her lips. I mean, those things had been okay in Gwen's world, but now they were real. They were threatening. I need you to know that I wanted to show someone, friends or parents even. I need you to know that I tried, but I couldn't bring myself to. The embarrassment would have crushed me. And I think maybe there was still a tiny part, a sick and shriveled thing just under my skin, living in my fingertips and between my hips that wanted to keep it secret. Wanted to have something all my own, and maybe that part of me was glad to see my name grace the screen, because just as quickly as I created Gwen, I started to resent her. I need you to know this because I deserve it. There's always a new girl in the drawing. They're getting worse. I can hear their screams. And today's Valentine's Day, and I'm sitting alone in the cafeteria surrounded by red things, fluffy, lacy things. Everyone has a rose. The office is giving them away so no one will feel left out. But I didn't pick one up. I had to write this down. I had to check my email again. Happy Valentine's Day. Let's tie the knot. The picture is in the same ridiculous style, but the ink looks fresh and the lines are sharp. The girl has ugly brown hair pulled into pigtails, and she's sitting on a polka dot bedspread. Heavy ropes crisscross her body. There's tape over her mouth. But she doesn't look afraid. My mom just called me saying I need to come home. She said she was picking me up. I could see her car through the windows. The person inside isn't my mother. An office aide is walking around the cafeteria with a green slip looking for me. To send me away, only a matter of time now. The bed in the drawing looks like my bed. The girl in the drawing is wearing my clothes. I wish I was afraid. The office aide is making eye contact, walking towards me. The car outside is honking. A girl is crying over spilling her chocolates. There are roses in the garbage bin. Mascara is running, but I'm not. I should be afraid. Happy Valentine's Day. Hey there kids, it's me. This ritual has been passed down throughout the centuries. It originates from the British Isles during the Middle Ages, where it was viewed as devil worship by Puritans and a way to protect your home by those who knew that what was really standing in their fields was not the devil. If completed successfully, the ritual will ensure you 1 year of safety, physical, fiscal, and or mental, depending on your events that occur during it. You will need a house in the countryside, preferably with a field of crops out back. Technically, all that's required is a large backyard, the larger the better, but success has only come from houses in the countryside. A candle. Attempting to use a flashlight, cell phone, or any other electronic source of light will be unsuccessful, causing the light source to flicker and die after only a few seconds. This is why either a candle, an oil lamp, or any sort of non-electric illumination is required. A crucifix. I'll explain that later. A watch or clock to carry around with you. Again, cell phones will not work during this ritual. To begin the ritual, make sure it is late enough for no one around to be outside, and make sure that the sun has set. The being the ritual is based around will not appear if anyone other than the summoner is around to detect its presence. The earliest successful summon was at 9 o'clock. Go out into your yard and whisper 7 times, but who will scare the crows away? While facing the house. On the 7th whisper, you should hear from behind you, "That's not your biggest problem." Walk back to the house without looking back. As soon as you reach the house, get inside and close the door. Now, the ritual begins. Everything in your house that can open has. Take your crucifix into a room with only one door, close the door, and leave it there. That will be your safe room in case the ritual goes wrong. Make sure all the doors, cupboards, cabinets, and whatever else that can open is closed. If he gets into your safe room, you're doomed. Your goal is to close everything that is open before your watch reaches midnight. It sounds easy in description, but think about it. Every bag, every door, every window, every container in your house has just opened. The challenge isn't closing them all. It's remembering them all. As you make your way through your darkened house, you'll notice that out of the corner of your eye, you'll be able to see a man dressed in simple farmer's clothes. His skin is ash gray. Don't look at him. And whatever you do, don't look directly into his eyes. Don't be afraid of him. This is not the man in the fields. He's merely a herald, a referee of sorts, to make sure that you're closing every container. He'll follow you, but he will not get in your way. Make sure not to look out into your backyard. If you do, you'll notice that there's a scarecrow that wasn't there before. Its head is a crow's skull, and its limbs are impossibly long versions of a human being's arms and legs. While the skin on them is pale, they're not skeletal. The only thing that's missing is a head. If you fail the ritual and do not reach your safe room in time, he'll take yours. The reason I was telling you not to look at the backyard is that when you notice the scarecrow, he will notice you. He'll then begin to get off of his post. This is the man in the fields. If you don't look at the backyard, don't see the post and the scarecrow, you'll have until midnight to complete the ritual. If you are 100% sure that everything in your house that can be opened has closed, make your way to bed and go to sleep. For exactly 1 year, you'll have complete and total safety in everything you do, depending on when you started the ritual. If you started at 3 hours from midnight, you'll only be completely physically safe. A lot of people have used this to elongate their lives past where they would normally end. People like cancer patients, the elderly. If you started 2 hours from midnight, you'll not only be physically safe, but financially safe for a year. You could quit your job and still never have a need for money. Either you win the lottery, people just feel compelled to give you things for free. However, you'll need to set up a plan for the end of the year, as your safety will wear off, and you will lose all the money that you've won. Make sure to either set up a business or make some smart investments. If you start the ritual 1 hour from midnight, and somehow manage to finish it, which is highly unlikely, you'll be completely and totally safe for 1 year. None of your actions will have any negative consequences. I tell you not to do anything immoral, but if you're going through your entire house in 1 hour and somehow manage to close all the boxes, doors, windows, cupboards, bags, cabinets, and drawers, then you can do whatever you want. If you did look out at the backyard, if you saw the man in the fields, you'll not get any of this. Not even if you finish the ritual. The man in the fields will get down off of his scarecrow post. He'll look at you. He'll begin sprinting. You have a minute at most to get to your safe room. Run inside, lock it tight, double check to see if everything is closed inside. If you don't want him getting in, you have to endure him scratching and clawing at the door, shrieking threats and promises of mercy if you open it. Whatever he says, do not open the door. There's no circumstance in which you should leave your safe room to confront the man in the fields. So good luck, and stay safe. There was an ominous silence in the air as we approached the edge of town. The clamor and hustle of city life had been replaced by the soft murmur of the wind. As it turned out, there was a pretty good reason for the weird, muted atmosphere. Everyone was dead. Every single person in the entire town. Most of the victims had been decapitated. Every now and then we'd encounter a body with its head still attached by a ragged strip of flesh. And that was somehow worse. I knew the bodies weren't real, but that didn't make it any better. Once again, it just made it worse. Falling Sky finally broke the silence. He stopped in the middle of the street, his tail swishing in agitation. "This is dark magic. He's a clever one, this bookman of yours. We can't ask any questions if there's no one left to answer them." My head was throbbing like a rotten tooth. I rubbed my temples again and suppressed the urge to start screaming. I grumbled. "Yeah, this is definitely a setback. Population sign of the city limits claim just over 40,000 people. It'll take forever to check out every parlor room in town. It's gonna be a lot of frickin' houses. I don't even know if I would recognize it, to be honest. Her habitat might be different from the original room." Falling Sky grunted. "Well, either way, get off my back. Ride's over. And remember what I said to you back at the farm, Billy Whitebread. Never tell anyone you rode on my back. That stays between us until the end of days." I awkwardly dismounted from his back and snorted. "Tell who? I'm not even supposed to be here. I doubt Vic would be okay with any of this shit. You know what I mean? Anyway, what now? I think we're screwed." I started to walk around in the street in aimless circles, deep in thought. I was gripped by a sense of impending doom. Dead bodies lined every street in all directions. They were hanging from open windows and dangling from carriages. Hundreds of bodies, thousands of them, as far as the eye could see. I could hardly wrap my head around it. "We don't need the spirit world for this part of our journey," Falling Sky answered in a wry tone. "The place you're looking for exists in the present." Understanding struck me like a bolt of lightning. I said, "We need to go back. Wait for me and your Hogan until I find some answers. I'll try to be quick, but I don't know. I don't even know what I'm looking for." Falling Sky gave me a wondered look. He said, "Take me with you." "Come on, I never get to go anywhere." I shook my head and snorted. "Are you nuts? There's all those microphones and cameras and shit. If Vic found out you left your habitat, he'd let Len throw me off a rooftop. And after that shit I pulled on him a while back, Len would be more than happy to oblige. He isn't my biggest fan these days." The skinwalker stomped his hoof in a petulant display of disappointment. He flared his nostrils and retorted, "You said Vic doesn't know what happens around the zoo. I'll turn into a field mouse and hide in your pocket. He'd never know." I rubbed my temples and muttered, "Well, Kaz would know. And I'll be honest with you, man, I'm not sure if that would be such a good thing." Falling Sky did a double take, trotted closer to me. He lowered his voice and whispered, "You think Casimir is the informer?" "You don't have to whisper. It's not like Kaz could hear us. Look, I don't know for sure, but maybe yes, maybe no. Vic killed his assistant because the dude was plotting to sabotage the zoo somehow, but how did Vic even find out? I mean, I doubt this dude was running his mouth about his plans, but I can see how it might be tempting to share the secret with someone close to him. You get what I'm saying here? So, yeah. I don't know anything for sure, but I have my suspicions." The horse shimmered and flickered for a moment, and then Falling Sky was standing before me in all his human glory. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "Suspicion is always better than blind trust. All right, then. I'll just take it easy and watch TV in my Hogan for a while." He smirked at me and added, "Don't forget, you drank the tea. Me, I'll be fine, but you? This should be interesting. Another story for the ancestors. Oh, and they're gonna love this one." I grimaced at him and said, "Hell. Yeah, I forgot about that. This is gonna suck. But it is what it is. Okay, man. I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this." I closed my eyes, and I imagined I was hanging onto that rope again. Only this time, I didn't let go. Instead, I climbed to the top, my body weightless and ethereal in the nexus between life and death. When I reached the top of the rope, I opened my eyes to the real world. Unfortunately, in the real world, I was a hot, sloppy mess of a human being. Nausea hit me with a closed fist, and I collapsed onto my hands and knees in the sand. Falling Sky shook his head at me as a spray of puke poured into the dirt. He said, "The sacred tea isn't for beginners. It's heavy. Very heavy. You should probably just hide yourself away in my hogan until you come down. Go watch TV and smoke some tobacco. What do you say? I'll turn on the lava lamp. We'll ride the waves." I squeezed my eyes shut and moaned. I'm regretting this pretty bad. I can't do this. I was wrecked. No joke. My thoughts were skittering around my brain like alien spiders. The world around me was a soft, focused nightmare of contrails, monstrous shapes, and shifting patterns. I could hardly bear to open my eyes. The intercom came to life with a loud click, and Casimir's voice crackled over the speakers overhead. "You require assistance, Billy. You don't look like you're doing very well." I flapped my hands in a dismissive gesture and yelled back, "No, I'm good. I don't need anything. Just give me a minute, okay?" I turned back to the skinwalker and croaked, "Give me a hand over here. I'm not sure if I can walk on my own. The floor keeps moving." Falling Sky made a rude noise with his lips and said, "Unless you're done getting sick. No offense, Billy, but I can't take it when people throw up. The sound, the smell, no thanks. Makes me want to throw up too." I gritted my teeth and groaned, "Just come here for a second, man. I gotta tell you something, okay? He was already shaking his head no. I snarled, "For fuck's sake," and forced myself to stand up. I just had to ride the waves. How hard could it be? I took a deep breath and told myself, it's not real. None of it is real. Just ignore what you see, put one foot in front of the other. I grew more confident with each step. Falling Sky clapped me on the shoulder as I drew closer, and he said, "That's it, Billy Whitebread. Just stay afloat, you'll be okay." He ushered me into his hogan and tried to make me sit down in a chair made of woven branches. I said, "No, I'm okay now. Kind of okay. Listen, man, I changed my mind about you staying here. I need someone who's got it together, and Kaz already said that he doesn't want to get involved. I mean, even if he did want to help, we can't both be inside the habitat at the same time, so it's gotta be you. No other choice." A smile spread around the skinwalker's face. He rubbed his hands together and said, "My physical being hasn't been outside these walls for many years. Gonna enjoy this." I softly replied, "Keep it down, okay? Listen, don't get any ideas about escaping, okay? We're going straight to Catherine's habitat, then we're coming right back. Remember, Vic knows your true name. If you manage to get past the goons, Vic will speak it out loud just out of spite, okay? As long as he can still talk, you're stuck here in the zoo." Falling Sky held up his hands and protested, "No need to get firm with me, Billy. I'm just happy to be doing something new." I growled, "I'm glad you're having a good time. Me, not so much. Your face is melting, walls are breathing, everything's fucked. I just want to curl up in a ball and start babbling about the universe. I can hardly think straight. This isn't fun, man. It sucks." Falling Sky shook a finger at me and countered, "Maybe you're the one who sucks, Billy Whitebread. You ever thought of that? You have a good heart, yes, but you're always complaining. No, don't deny it. You're a cry monkey and you know it. Do you have a very angry, domineering kind of mother? Because an overbearing mother figure can often be the root of a lot of issues." I snapped, "Oh, good. Skinwalker Freud. Not now, okay? Just do your thing, Mr. Mouse, and let's go. You're going for a pocket ride." Kaz raised an eyebrow at me as I came stumbling into the service tunnel. He said, "You look like a maniac. Your hair is dripping with sweat and your eyes are like saucers." I muttered, the tea's kicking my ass. "How long have I been gone?" The big Russian gave me a ghost of a smile as he gently said, "You did not go anywhere. You sat on a log for perhaps 10 minutes, then you began to vomit into the sand." I let out an off-kilter giggle and said, "Time's different over there. Look, we have to go back to Catherine's habitat. We need to find something. No, don't ask me what, because I don't really know just yet. But I guess we'll figure it out when we see it." Kaz paused in mid-step, and he gave me a considering look. He asked, "Who's we, Billy?" I cannot go inside. I must stand watch at the door. I froze, and my poor, drugged-up brain started to panic. I felt my stupid yapper drop open, and I stammered, I didn't we. No, I wanted to say me, not we. Just me, alone, falling skies, and... As soon as the last sentence started to cross my lips, I had to restrain myself from clapping my hands over my mouth. Kaz gave me another probing stare, but he stayed silent and followed me down the tunnel. I tried my best to walk like a normal human being. I just had to sail the waves. One foot in front of the other as I navigated the spaces between. If I didn't think about it too hard, I could keep moving forward. Felt like I was doing it all wrong, but at least I was moving. When he got to the entrance of Catherine's habitat, I asked Kaz to punch in the code. Pushing the buttons in the correct order was a tad beyond my ability at that point. He wordlessly obliged, but he stopped me as I was about to lurch across the threshold of the habitat. He said, "Remember to watch in the mirror. Do not get yourself killed." I gave him a blank look. Then I snorted, "Yeah, of course," as I fumbled for the mirror in question. Truth be told, I'd forgotten about it entirely. I know that sounds really fucking stupid, but keep in mind that I could barely form a rational thought at that point. Mirror now safely in hand, I stepped into the habitat and the door slid shut behind me. I found the poltergeist sitting in her rocking chair, her severed head resting in her lap as usual. I approached her with extreme caution. She watched me shuffle closer with a hopeful expression on her face. Even in my confused state of psychedelic delirium, I felt my heart shrivel a bit in my chest. I desperately wished I had some good news to share, but I didn't. I was failing. I tried to order my thoughts before I spoke. It was really difficult. That's putting it mildly. It was almost like someone had smashed open an ant farm in my brain and I was attempting to round up the entire colony with a pair of chopsticks. Just a fuckload of these speedy guys running skitter-scatter all over the floor, and there I was, trying not to step on them as I clacked my little sticks together. Finally, I blurted out, I'm still trying to figure it out, all this, this whole situation's kind of fucked up, right? So, I did some drugs and I went to the spirit world. At first I was like, oh man, this sucks. And there's all these fucking fog everywhere. I can't see anything. But then I freed my mind and the universe answered by setting up a sort of like this old-timey version of our own city. But it was like back in your time on the day of your funeral. It was kind of like one of those dinner theater murder mysteries. But then I had to come back here to the present because the bookman killed everyone in the... It trailed off, and we looked at each other for a few moments in the mirror. Her hopeful expression had crumpled into a look of crushing, miserable disappointment. I sighed. Look, I'm doing my best to find his name, but he's doing his best to stop me. I need your help. A man's voice came drifting out of my pocket. He said, "We need your help. We as in more than one. Two, in fact." I was very rude, Billy Whitebread. Wasn't it the wise and knowledgeable Falling Sky who showed you the path to freeing your mind? I've been with you every step of the way on this journey. That was very rude. I glared into my pocket and hissed, "Be quiet, man, not so loud." Catherine was staring at me with great interest. She lifted her head into the air for a better look. I tried my best to shield my hands from the cameras, and I showed her the talking mouse who was stowed away in my pocket. The poltergeist was mesmerized by the spectacle. Her expression softened into a look of wonder. The skinwalker stood up on his tiny hind legs, and he lifted a paw in greeting. He said, "My name is Falling Sky. We want to help you, Catherine, but we need to learn the bookman's real name. Do you know what it is?" Catherine silently mouthed, "No," and her lower lip started to quiver. Tears welled up in her eyes. In a gentle tone, Falling Sky said, "Don't despair, little one. We won't let him win. Please, tell us everything you can remember about him." I nodded in agreement and said, "Any little detail might help. What was your relationship to him? Was he your teacher? A neighbor?" Catherine slid out of the rocking chair and walked over to the fireplace. She tucked her head under her arm and plucked a knick-knack from the mantelpiece with her free hand. Solemnly, she held it out for inspection. It was a ceramic figurine of a fluffy sheep. Catherine put the figurine back on the shelf and then she knelt down to write something in the cold ashes of the fireplace. When she was done, she tapped the word for emphasis. Falling Sky looked up at me and whispered, "I never learned how to read English. What does it say?" I blew out a frustrated sigh and muttered, "It says person." And the figure was a sheep, so... what, a shepherd? A human shepherd? I don't know what the hell she means by any of this shit. I don't know, man. I think I'm just fucking a terrible fucking detective. Like, I suck at this so bad. I wish she could just show me what happened somehow, but that's... Catherine abruptly seized me by the wrist, making me falter in mid-sentence. Falling Sky let out a startled squeak and jumped out of my hand. As her ghostly fingers encircled my living flesh, a painful jolt ran up my arm and slammed into my brain, and then I found myself... somewhere else. Not another place, but another time and another existence. It was the 1890s, and I was Catherine. I was cowering in the parlor with the curtains drawn shut. I was hiding because the person was visiting with Mother in the drawing room. I didn't know the person's name. He was always carrying a large book under his arm, so I thought of him as the Bookman. I was terrified of the Bookman. He was very tall, and his demeanor was cold and stern. He was always surrounded by a disagreeable odor of old pipe tobacco and animal dung. When the weather was foul, the Bookman wore a long black coat with a hood that hid most of his face. All you could see was his curled smile, and the rest was obscured in shadow. All of this was frightening enough on its own, but the real reason I was afraid of the Bookman was his smile. There was something awful lurking behind that carotid, nicotine-stained grin. He was hungry. Mother couldn't see it, but I could. I didn't know what he was hungry for, but I could sense it was very bad. Mother often referred to the Bookman as our good shepherd. But he wasn't a shepherd at all. He was a wolf. Mother didn't understand why I was afraid of the Bookman, and try as I might, I couldn't seem to adequately put my fear into words. She thought it was all very silly. I knew my fear of the person made her quite annoyed with me, so whenever he came to our house, I just tried my best not to be seen. I sat there in the gloom and listened as their voices drifted down the hall from the sitting room. Mother laughed at something the Bookman said, and then the voices began to move further away. Before long, I heard the front door open. When it closed again, I felt a flood of relief wash through my entire body. He was gone. I pulled the curtains back, and the pale light of a gray afternoon illuminated the parlor. Mother called out, "Catherine! I must be off to do the shopping. Mind yourself while I'm gone. Stay out of mischief. And don't open the door for strangers." She stepped out into the porch. The deadbolt slid home, and I was left all alone in our big, silent house. Mother was still searching for a new governess, and the maid only came on Tuesdays and Fridays. I wandered about the house for a while, and then I selected a picture book from the bookshelf and sat down in my rocking chair. The rocking chair had been gifted by Father on my 7th birthday. When you're only 7, everything around you seems like it was made for a giant, but my rocking chair was perfect for me and only me. In my opinion, it was the finest chair in the whole world. I sat there, rocking and daydreaming, with the book forgotten in my lap, when I was startled by a rapid knocking at the front door. I peeked out the window to see who it was, and my heart crawled into my throat. It was the Bookman. He had returned, and Mother wasn't here to protect me from his hungry smile. He saw the curtain twitch, and he stared at the window with narrowed eyes. I dropped to the floor and huddled against the wall. The Bookman knocked again, and then a third time. When no one answered, the Bookman finally turned away. I heard his boots clomping down the steps, and then there was silence. I waited for a minute or two before I dared to peek out the window again. There was no sign of him in the street. I let out a huge sigh of relief, and I ran back to the parlor. I rounded the corner and crashed into his legs. While I had been cowering and praying for him to go away, the Bookman had slipped to the back of the house and pried open a window. I staggered away from his savage smile, my heart slamming in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs felt sluggish and heavy. I tried to yell at the top of my lungs, but nothing came out except for a tiny squeak of terror. His eyes glittered in the dim light of the gray afternoon. He stooped down to look into my face, his hands planted on his knees, and he said, "Such a pretty girl. Do you believe yourself to be innocent? You're not innocent. Not at all. You're an unrepentant sinner. Isn't that so, Catherine? Or should I call you by your true name? Lilith, Jezebel, harlot." I cowered against the wall. The bookman leaned even closer. He was breathing heavily and his breath was hot and putrid. He crooned, "It's written in the good book. The faithful will bring their children to see the shepherd so he can lay his hands on them and pray." The bookman inhaled deeply, savoring my fear like the finest perfume. He continued, "The disciples rebuked their presence, but the shepherd told them, 'Suffer the little children to come unto me, because anyone who doesn't receive God as a little child, he shall not enter heaven.' Do you understand the meaning of his words? I want to save you, my child. Receive me, and I will deliver you to God." I suddenly became aware that his hands were tugging at the fastenings on my dress. My paralysis finally broke. I darted past him and ran for the door, screaming for Mother with every step. The bookman caught me as I was pawing at the deadbolt. He clamped his callous hands over my face, suffocating my terrifying wailing, and he dragged me back to the parlor. He was growling like a dog in the grip of a terrible rage. His eyes were blazing like hellfire. A butcher's knife appeared from a fold in his cloak. The sharp tip was pressed against my throat. I cried out for Mother, but she wasn't there to save me. It was just me, the wolf, and his hunger. Panting his foul breath into my face, the bookman snarled, "You will receive me, young Jezebel. You will receive me. You will receive me." The blade was shoved into my neck, and I felt a sharp snap across my entire being, like a rubber band that had been stretched to its limits, then released to fly across the room. In the next instant, I was curled up on the floor in Catherine's habitat. Back in my own time. I was screaming. Falling Sky was running in agitated circles on the floor, and Casimir was demanding to know what the hell was going on over the intercom. I sat up and wiped a stream of tears from my eyes. My heart was pounding in my chest. I called out, I'm okay, man. I'm fucking hell. I'm okay." I cleared my throat and added, "Just hang on a minute." I scooped up Falling Sky with trembling hands, and I tucked him back into my pocket. I whispered, "Stay quiet, man, we're almost in the clear." He whispered back, "I thought you were dying, Billy Whitebread. Glad you're still alive." I let out a shaky little breath and murmured, "Me too, buddy. Me too." Kaz was waiting with crossed arms and a stern look as I exited the habitat. He rumbled, "You fell to the ground and you began to scream. I'm starting to wonder if I should allow this to continue." I closed my eyes against the undulations of the walls. It was making me feel sick. I croaked. She reached out and grabbed my arm, and then I watched it happen through her own eyes. Her murder. I fucking saw who did it, Kaz. Starting to think that it was, the whatchamacallit, at the church. The clergyman or whatever, you know? He was like conveniently absent when we visited the church, and I thought it was kind of weird. Plus the whole thing about the book and teaching and shepherds and sheep and all that shit, you know? But this guy, I don't think he was a preacher. He looked pretty rough. He smelled like sheep shit. I think he was a shepherd, like an actual shepherd, like not a metaphorical one. Kaz gave me a vaguely puzzled look and said, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I believe you. Never mind, man. Just a bunch of stuff that happened on the other side. It's like, I mean, I don't understand why a dude like that would ever be a regular guest of a wealthy family. I mean, especially back then. And there's that book that he was always carrying under his arm. Like, what was it? I kind of assumed it was a Bible, but now I'm not so sure. Casimir looked thoughtful. He said, perhaps he butchered his own livestock and delivered the meat to clients around the city. The book could be a business ledger where he would write down dates and payment information. It is possible. I frowned in concentration, mulling it over, and shook my head. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. I'm going to go back and find this evil motherfucker, you know, back to the spirit world. Casimir looked troubled. He peered down at my sweaty, pallid face and asked, are you sure this is a good idea? You look terrible. I snorted. Well, let's see. I'm high as fuck, and I've seen like a zillion dead bodies tonight, not to mention I was just horribly murdered in a ghostly vision, so how am I supposed to look, man? Jeez, just give me a break over here. I hesitated. I sighed. Man, I want to level with you here, okay? I might be in danger. I felt an angry little scuffle in my pocket, and I added, Falling Sky too. We're both probably in danger. The bookman, he isn't an ordinary spirit. It's like he became something a lot more dangerous. I think he's trying to avoid, you know, actually fucking killing us, but it's not because he's a nice guy. He's pretty much pure evil, and believe me, this guy is going to do what he needs to do. Kaz winced at the news, and he gravely shook his head. We already have a vengeful necromancer who sends resurrected bodies to murder us. Do you really need this in your life as well? See, this is what you get for meddling in the affairs of the undead. Very well, Billy. Do as you must. All I will say is that Victor will be very displeased when he has to start looking for another assistant. I grumbled. Okay, man, yeah, thanks for the pep talk. Then I headed back to Falling Sky's habitat. Kaz followed behind with a bemused expression on his face. This time I was able to ignore the landscape of rippling walls and visual distortions. I was starting to realize that our world is basically a mirage. There's a lot more stuff around us than we could ever perceive, let alone understand. Our narrow slice of reality is kind of like peering through a cosmic kaleidoscope. It can completely change with the smallest twist of the lens. In the end, the only constants are good, evil, and our profound inability to truly understand either one. Humankind is lost in a shadowland of deceitful specters and sinister illusions. We're blind to the truth, and I fear we'll never be able to see the light. When I got back to the privacy of Falling Sky's Hogan, I pulled him out of my pocket and set him on the floor. He transformed back to his true self, a middle-aged Navajo man who looked like he ate right and worked out regularly. Even though he looked pretty damn good for an 800-year-old man, there was a sadness in his eyes that was never touched by his laughter. I could sense a horrible tragedy in his past life, something so awful and unthinkable. His only choice had been to submerge the trauma into the depths of his soul. I vowed to myself that if we managed to come out of the situation in one piece, I'd convince him to talk about it. Confession, you know. It's the first step to healing. He gave me a puzzled glance and said, "What are you staring at?" "No offense, Billy Whitebread, but I don't like you that way." I snorted. "Methinks the skinwalker doth protest too much." "Never mind, dude. We'll talk about it some other time. Ready to do this?" He smiled a little to himself and asked, Are you ready? This bookman of yours will try to kill us when we get back. We're at war with a powerful enemy. He will not show us mercy. He softly replied, Yeah, I know. Preying on the weak and innocent. That was his pastime. He was a serial killer. Wonder how many women and children he victimized when he was still alive. The skinwalker gave me a grim look. He said, Even one is too many. He thinks he's untouchable. He's never gone to war with Falling Sky and Billy Whitebread, has he? He's about to get an unpleasant surprise. I nodded and said, I hope so, man. I really do. Shitbags like him, they like to operate in the dark. So we'll have to drag him into the light. And we'll let him burn. We locked eyes with each other, and the physical world fell away in strips and fragments. We were going back to finish what we started. We were going to war. I've been consumed. Whatever remains of my voice is now hidden beneath the deafening buzz of 80,000 souls. My body is now a vessel for something much greater than myself. My sense of individuality has been martyred for the greater whole, yet beneath the cacophony of the many-footed hive that's taking control, there still is a trace of something human. It always sneaks up on you, doesn't it? You go through your life thinking that you've gotten used to being single, that all the feelings from your past flames have gone dormant, but then February 14th rolls around and you get the feeling for that scorching fire of loneliness. Out of nowhere, the whole world decides to sing the praises of their love life, and you are reminded of just how lonely you are. It's been 3 years since we split, and I want to believe that I've been getting better, but every year the wounds are reopened. Valentine's Day always provides me with a sense of dread. Seeing all those happy people write down posts about how fulfilling they are in their relationships makes me feel like I failed as a human being. This year, however, there was an extra layer of dread. This year, there was a stinging suspicion that Ellie would get engaged. In the morning, I couldn't get out of bed. The initial torrent of romantic social media posts had me paralyzed. The only way that I could get through the day without breaking down was to find a distraction, something to help me block out everyone else's happiness. As I lay in bed scrolling through the internet, it came to me. A headline to answer all my woes. Saint Valentine is also the patron saint of beekeepers. Enjoy your romantic evening, but don't forget the bees are going extinct. A headline gave me strength to rise out of bed. As I ate breakfast, I read half a dozen articles about how important the bees are to the planet's ecosystem. The scientific evidence was overwhelming. Bees were dying at an unprecedented rate. Something had to be done. By the time I got into the office, I had made a conscious decision. This Valentine's Day wasn't about love. It was about bees. I spent the entire morning chucking out bee facts. Did people know that most of the world's food supply relied on bees? Did it know that 40% of all the bees in the United States had died between 2018 and 2019? Could they believe that no one was doing anything about it? There was something tranquil about the thought of an impending ecological disaster. I mean, if our entire civilization ceased to exist, then there wouldn't be ex-girlfriends to worry about. Ellie wouldn't be falling in love with someone else, because she'd be dead. I mean, hell, it seemed silly to worry about her even while she was still alive. It didn't matter if she was spending her evenings with some hunk, eating mangoes, having amazing sex. There were bigger issues at hand. The bees were dying. My newfound bee obsession managed to shield me from all the notions of small talk. throughout the morning, but by the time I went into the break room for lunch, the Valentine's Day mood became inescapable. The break room was covered in pink streamers. A stack of heart-shaped cookies was on the table for anyone to grab. Everyone was chatting away about their happy relationships. These people didn't care about the world ending. All they wanted to talk about were their plans for the evening. No one wanted to talk about bees. Being in that room made me think about my own evening plans. I grabbed my sandwich and went outside. The park was calmer. There was the occasional sighting of people holding hands, but the faint smell of exhaust fumes helped me focus on the real issue. It didn't matter that I was single. What really mattered was how our species was destroying the planet. Everything around me was the product of human ingenuity. The slick cars, the impressive high-rises, even the park I was sitting in. They were all monuments to human inventiveness. In just a couple centuries, we had managed to take the planet from a place where nature tried to murder us at every step, to a world where people could tweet and jump out of planes for fun. It was a shame that our drive towards innovation was also responsible for the pesticides, for the pollution, for the impending death of the bees. My thoughts about the terrifying nature of humanity had woven themselves into a like-worthy Facebook status. After I finished my sandwich, I shared a couple of bee-related articles and thumbed my philosophical treatise into existence. I secretly hoped that Ellie would stumble upon my thought piece and spend the night thinking about the plight of the modern bee. I was meant to be back at work. My musings made me lose track of time, yet as I got up to leave the park, I noticed something. A lone bee sat beneath my bench, motionless. Seeing a bumblebee in February would have been bizarre 10 years ago, but the concept of a cold winter is something that's slowly thawed from reality into the realm of childhood memory. I crouched down and observed, casualty of the ecological disaster that I had helped perpetuate. I poked it. The stinger of the little hairy creature sluggishly reached for my finger. Its wings dragged across the concrete as it attempted to defend itself, but it was clear that the bee was scarcely conscious. I snapped a picture of it and then rushed over to a nearby corner store. This little guy wasn't going to die on my watch. All of the articles suggested that the best way to help a tired bee was to provide it with a mixture of water and sugar. At first, the bee was motionless. I was scared that it had died while I was out buying the supplies, but after a while, its antenna started to move. Within half an hour, it was on its feet and ready to fly away. I live-streamed the entire affair. When I returned to work, there were some intrusive questions about how I spent my lunch break, but I managed to sidestep everything by saying I had a personal emergency. I went through the rest of my workday knowing that while everyone else was slaving away for their corporate overlords, I had managed to actually make a difference. I didn't check any of the notifications until I returned back home. I wasn't helping the bees for clout. I was helping them because it was the right thing to do. I was helping them because I wanted to live in a world where my grandchildren would be able to feast on honey. I would have been content with doing my part without any attention from the world, but being public about it helped spread awareness of their plight. When I finally checked on my posts, the engagement was off the charts. I was the champion of the bees. Nearly 100 people had heard my message. The articles that I shared got reposted a dozen times. My status update had instigated a lively discussion. I knew that somewhere out there during those stupid candlelit dinners, people would be talking about how Monsanto is responsible for the plight of our little hairy friends. I scrolled up and down my newsfeed, drinking the sweet nectar of success, and then I saw it. Her hand. The hand I nervously held on prom night. There was a ring on it. 600 likes. 300 comments. I slammed my laptop shut and paced around the room. I tried focusing on climate change, on corporate lobbyists paying politicians to turn a blind eye to harmful pesticides, on the ice caps melting, but I couldn't. The thought of Ellie getting engaged burrowed into my mind like a brain parasite. A film reel of all of our happy moments played in my head. Our first date, the first time we said our I love yous, our trip to the mountains, the sex. All the memories played on in my head, but it was as if someone had spliced me out. In my stead, there was someone taller, someone cooler, someone who had their shit together, someone who would be a great dad. I felt sick. My stomach spun between a dizzying emptiness and a sudden urge to vomit. They would get married. They would have kids. They would have grandkids. Their grandkids would eat honey. I hugged my toilet bowl and dry heaved. I could feel the world spinning on without me. After the panic attack had passed, I returned to my bedroom and shut off the lights. My mouth tasted of acid. My eyes were burning. There weren't enough tissues in the world to clear out my nose. I was exhausted, but sleep refused to come. All I could think about was Ellie being happy with someone who wasn't me. For the past 3 years, I'd lived in quiet hope of us getting back together, of a random text coming through one morning where she would announce that she missed me and thought about me every single day since the breakup. And I was faced with the cold truth. Our feelings weren't mutual. Punk. The sound was imperceptible at first. I was too busy thinking of the sex that Ellie was having. But the taps slowly grew louder. Punk, punk, punk. I sat up and looked around, trying to focus on the source of the sound. A hint of a swelling orchestra could be heard from upstairs. My neighbors were probably cuddling beneath a blanket watching some romantic period piece. Punk, punk, punk. The sound wasn't coming from my neighbors. It was far too loud for that. I held my breath and listened. The sound was coming from my room. Punk, punk, punk. A lone bumblebee was tapping its little stinger on the glass of my window. I got out of bed and turned on my light. Punk, 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 punk. Before the absurdity of the lone bee traveling to the 6th floor of an apartment complex could dawn on me, 3 friends joined the bee. They tapped away at the window chaotically, as if they wanted something. Punk, 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 punk. More bees materialized out of the night and drifted towards my window. The world outside was starting to disappear beneath a layer of black and yellow. Pong, 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 pong. Whatever comradeship I had felt for the bees was gone. These little stingers were aimed right at me. Memories of wasps and hornets' nest filled my head with terror. I ran through my apartment, making sure that all the windows were closed. Bees weren't just knocking on my bedroom. Every window in my apartment was covered in a thick layer of bees. As I moved through my apartment, their stingers reached a thunderous roar. Punk, 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 punk. I stood in the center of the apartment. As far away from my windows as possible, my arms started to itch. Memories of previous stings were preparing me for the pain. It felt as if there was a unity in the stinger knocks now, as if there was a voice hiding beneath the cacophony. But my mind refused to accept it. Pong, 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 let us in. There was a faint buzzing sound coming from beneath my front door. The knocking of the stingers had reached so high a frequency that I was barely able to comprehend my own thoughts. My apartment door gently shook. Looking through the peephole revealed blackness, and a blackness that shifted around with the intensity of 1,000 feet. Pong, 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 pong. We want to. Pong, 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 pong. Help. I could hear the voice clearly now. Beneath the hive lurked something sentient. Something sweet. As soon as I focused on it, the noise of the stingers died down. A wave of syrupy calm spread through my veins. We know you're troubled. We know you feel pain. The same skin which itched out of fear of being stung was now draped in a warm blanket of cosmic harmony. It felt like I was a part of something much bigger, something much better. I drifted towards my bedroom window. The knocking and the stingers had stopped, only a faint buzz remained. You helped us. Now let us help you. Let us ease your mind. Let us aid you on your journey. I opened the window. There is much more work to be done. They covered me. Before I could comprehend what was happening, my body was coated in an army of tiny bees. My apartment disappeared beneath a carpet of fine yellow hair. Let us in. Let us help you. Let us ease your burden. My knees buckled beneath the wave of sweet ecstasy. My skin could no longer perceive a difference between me and the bees. My jaw relaxed, my mouth filled with movement. We can save it all. If we work together, we can save everyone. You've done good work, but together, we can do so much more. Let us in. A faint memory emerged. In some other life, I sat in a cinema. Ellie was leaning on me, a bit of popcorn stuck to the back of my throat. The audience laughed at something on the screen. I washed down the popcorn with her soda. Yet the memory drifted away as gently as it emerged. This didn't happen to me. This didn't happen to us. They made their way down our throat, each arrival sending another ripple of pleasure through our body. We could feel them in our veins. We were whole. And then the room was empty. But we didn't feel alone. A sense of wholeness radiated throughout our entire universe. Do you want to say goodbye? Somewhere within us is still the hint of a person, but he's irrelevant. If we let the bees die, the food chain of this planet will collapse. We will work together to keep us all alive. Our grandchildren will taste honey. If you're reading this, I apologize in advance. Sorry this is so long. There's a lot I've been keeping on my shoulders for a long time. I trust all of you here. I have to share my story. You don't have to believe me. I'm sure most of you won't, but I'm laying it all out here so at least I won't go to my grave with this horrible secret. So I'll stop rambling now and I'll lay it down for you. For a long time, me and my two closest friends, Logan and Joel, we've had a ridiculous tradition. One of us had a birthday. The birthday boy got pranked. A little background on my friends. Joel was always the skinny kid. No matter how much junk he ate, he always seemed to be 10 pounds underweight. He usually wore the same clothes, t-shirts, jeans. If it was cold, he wore a hoodie. If it was warm, he wore shorts. He had shaggy blonde hair that usually fell over his face. Couldn't grow facial hair if he tried, and believe me, he tried. Joel was naive, endearingly so. Logan was the outgoing person in our crew. He was athletic, and at least a foot taller than the other two of us. He had buzzed black hair and thick eyebrows. He came from a family with Mediterranean roots. Logan could be very persuasive. He had this amazing way of talking himself out of almost any situation. He could diffuse people without saying anything. He always said it was his award-winning smile. And me. You can call me Edward. Anyway, our tradition started when we were high schoolers in the late 90s. Joel and I decided to pull a practical joke on Logan for his birthday in July. We showed up at his house before he got up and prepared him for the worst morning of his life. We almost woke him up, giggling like idiots. Just a few of the highlights: we put plastic wrap over his toilet seat. We filled his shower head with red Kool-Aid powder and replaced his face soap with school glue. Let's just say that he had an interesting morning. Of course, he swore revenge shortly after. Joel and I got a good laugh out of it. Since my birthday is in mid-October, I would have been next on the list. I braced myself for retaliation. At first I thought I was off the hook as my birthday came and went uneventfully. The prank didn't come until Halloween night. I spent the entire evening out in my neighborhood with my little cousin trick-or-treating, who was dressed as a Secret Service agent, complete with a little black suit, aviator sunglasses, and a coiled earpiece. He was even strapped with a plastic pistol in a holster. When I got home, I was exhausted. Chasing a 9-year-old around and making sure he didn't get run over was a lot more tiring than I had anticipated. At the end of the night, I ambled to my room like a zombie and flung the door open, intent on passing out the second my head hit the pillow. As soon as my door completely opened, an ear-piercing siren assaulted my ears, instantly triggering my fight-or-flight response and filling me with adrenaline. My brain struggled to understand while my body decided to attack the doorframe. Clawing helplessly at the wall, I spun around on my heels and bolted in the opposite direction, slamming my shoulder hard into the doorframe. After my senses returned, I realized the noise was coming from inside my room. When I checked behind my door, I found an air horn duct taped to the wall, perfectly aligned with the door handle. I instantly knew who was responsible. Joel, of course, was next. His birthday was late January. Logan and I got together and planned our prank carefully. Logan invited Joel over for a night of StarCraft, pizza, and various sugary junk foods. I was also invited, but pretended to have other plans, so I wouldn't be able to make it. While the two of them were hanging out, I snuck into Joel's house and kidnapped Rocco, his 2-year-old Lhasa Apso. The next day, Joel came to school thinking his dog ran away, which, for him, was the cruelest prank of all. I actually felt bad. It wasn't long before we told him the truth. He didn't speak to either of us for a week after that. And so, this tradition was born, and this went on for years. That is, until things went wrong. One year, when we were all in our mid-20s, Logan and I ran into each other at a party. We hadn't seen each other for a couple of years. After catching up, we started reminiscing about our old pranks. It was only a matter of time before we had formulated a plot to prank Joel. The first part of the plan was to invite him to Logan's grandfather's cabin for a weekend. It was situated in the woods by a lake around 3 hours out of town. Well, of course, Joel, knowing his birthday was just around the corner, and the fact that we hadn't hung out in a while, immediately suspected foul play and called us out on the prank. Miraculously, we were able to convince him that we were done pranking and too grown up for dirty tricks. When we finally got out of the cabin, we actually had a great time bonding and doing buddy stuff. This basically amounted to drinking, goofing off, and telling ghost stories around the campfire pit behind the cabin. The second night, after we were good and toasted, the second part of the plan was engaged. We were passing a cigarette around when Logan suggested we take his grandpa's boat out into the lake to go fishing. "Catch the little fuckers while they're asleep," he said, laughing. This was, after all, a tradition of ours as well. 3 of us had fished together countless times on that lake over the years. This was as good a time as any. It was cold, but not cold enough for the lake to freeze. We climbed into the boat, and I paddled us out into the center of the glassy lake. I could see my friend's breath puffing out swirly wisps. We then proceeded to drunkenly fumble through an old, stained tackle box, attempting to bait hooks. Suddenly, Logan shouted at me, "Hey, be more careful!" He grabbed my left hand as blood ran down his finger. "You slashed me with your hook, jackass!" I stood up in the boat. "You did that yourself, you drunken idiot!" I fired back. Logan stood up and shoved me with his good hand. He forced me back down into the sitting position. Within moments, we were wrestling and rolling around on the floor of the small fiberglass boat. Stop it, the boat's gonna tip over, Joel yelled helplessly. I let go and Logan stood up abruptly and yelled something at me. He lost his balance suddenly, pitching off the side of the boat. He fell backwards and was swallowed up by the black water instantly. He sank like a stone. Holy shit! Shit! Joel screamed, looking over the edge into the water. It was too dark to see our friend. He wasn't thrashing around. He didn't seem to be surfacing either. I pointed a flashlight into the water. Joel quickly hit the switch on his Duracell headlamp. The beams cut into the murky lake, but apparently not deep enough to make contact. First, there were bubbles. Lots of them. Then, there was nothing. Do something! Shouted Joel on the verge of tears. Joel's head was on a swivel, checking back and forth for Logan in the water. We silently shone our lamps from point to point, looking for any sign. Logan was just gone. Joel turned to me, his headlamp shining into my eyes. What the hell, man? He said. He is crying now. Logan's a good swimmer. It doesn't make sense. Joel slumped back into the boat, cradled his face in his hands. I leaned back over the boat's edge, shining my light again. Logan was nowhere to be found. Now, of course, I knew Logan was a good swimmer. He was an exceptional swimmer, as a matter of fact. He spent time at the lake every summer growing up. He was such a good swimmer that Joel didn't realize he had swam under the boat and toward Fidget's bar, a small island near the center of the lake. The actual name was Box Island, if you were to look it up on a map. In an age-long past, Logan's grandfather had an Australian shepherd named Fidget, and he named the island after the pooch, allegedly long before they did. So we always called it Fidget's Bar. The island was only 100 feet or so away from where our boat was situated, so I had no doubt the swim was a breeze to Logan. At this moment, Joel looked back at me again. Do something! Why don't we do something? I started to remember back in high school when he made Joel think his dog had run away. That feeling of guilt, that the joke had maybe gone a little too far. I saw Joel's face now, his eyes red and swollen, his nose running, his hands were trembling. I shouted to Joel, let's go over to Fidget's Bar and regroup. I grabbed the oars and started to paddle in the direction of the island. Joel grabbed onto the front of the boat anxiously. Soon the boat made landfall, scraping ashore. Joel sprung out and pulled the front of the boat in. He yanked hard as I was getting up, and I fell backwards into the boat. I didn't say anything. As I was climbing out of the boat, Joel already stripping his clothes off. What are you doing, Joel? I asked. I'm going in after him, he shouted as he pulled his shirt off. Look, Joel, I started. But he wasn't hearing any of it. Joel waited out until he was waist deep in the frigid water of the lake. I shouted after him, Joel, it was a prank! Logan's here on the island! As the word prank escaped my mouth, I could see Joel's shoulders go up. He didn't turn around, but he was frozen in place. There was a long pause as I stood at the shore near the fiberglass boat, looking out at Joel. An icy wind dragged across the surface of the lake. The trees on the island behind us thrashed about in the gust. For a moment, my eyes caught the moon in the sky. And I looked up. Just for a moment. The hit came next, and I didn't expect it. Joel's fist collided with the bridge of my nose hard. I heard a pop, and then nothing. Then I was on the ground. The cold wind was still blowing, but for the moment, my face was hot. I heard a ringing in my ears. For a few seconds, Joel paced around the rocky shore. When the wind stopped blowing, it was suddenly eerily quiet on the shore of Fidget's Bar. I stood up and saw that Joel was standing with his back to me, still shirtless, shoeless, and only wearing wet boxer shorts. His ribs stuck out as he breathed. I didn't say a word, but started to pick up his clothes. Once I had gathered all of his stuff, I handed it over to him. Joel took the clothes and got dressed. Meanwhile, I sat back and lit a cigarette. I ran my hand over my face and felt my nose. My hand came back bloody. "So," Joel asked me quietly, "where's Logan now?" I pointed my thumb behind me at the thick mass of trees, the ones leading into absolute darkness. I have no idea. He should be here on the bar somewhere. I pulled myself to my feet and looked into the dark of the woods. There was no noise on Fidget's bar. The wind had ceased to howl, the trees stood still and silent. Joel and I stood side by side, at the precipice of darkness. It occurred to me that I had never actually explored the island before, neither had Joel to my knowledge. Logan used to talk about blazing trails in the brush of the bar with his grandpa, but that was years ago. Presently, we stood at the edge of the dark woods with no real knowledge of what lay ahead. In fact, one fact remained. Logan hadn't shown himself yet. Then Joel inhaled sharply and took a step towards the woods. He flipped the switch on his headlamp, casting a beam into the darkness of the forest. I turned my flashlight on and followed suit. Joel's head was on a swivel, sweeping back and forth to dimly reveal our surroundings. Together, we walked upon what appeared to be a trail that led deep into the trees of Fidget's bar. Up ahead, there seemed to be some kind of clearing. At this point, I wanted to find my friend and get the hell off the island. I wasn't upset about the punch. I deserved it, probably. Mostly, I was still in shock of what happened, and regretted the whole prank idea. Also, something felt wrong. We hadn't discussed hiding on the island like this. We should have seen Logan by now. The original plan was to regroup on the island, and then Logan would jump out, scare Joel. Well, that should have been the end of it. Joel would have laughed and got me, and we would have headed back to the cabin for drinks and shenanigans. This plan had gone sour, and I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach, one that I couldn't shake. Up ahead in the clearing, we could see a well. It was an old-fashioned well, built from stone, with pulleys suspended above. The rusted crank looked like it hadn't been touched in ages. Ferns and spindly vines of ivy had grown around the base of the well and coiled up around the wooden frame above. No rope or bucket to be seen. Just beyond the well, nearly swallowed by trees, was a small shack buried in the underbrush. I couldn't hear a single sound here. For a brief moment, I felt as though I might have hurt my ears. Joel hit me. Maybe it was the fall. There were no birds, no voices, no wind, no nothing, but stillness, silence in the forest. Finally, a noise. It was nearly inaudible at first, then it grew. It was a voice, calling out. I recognized it as Logan's. Initially, I was flooded with relief, but his voice sounded far away and echoed. Joel and I ran towards the sound, which appeared to be coming from inside the shack. It was a dilapidated old building, not much larger than a detached garage. Once we looked into the one of the foggy, cracked windows. It was obvious that someone, at some time, lived in there. Most of the windows were broken or covered in branches. The siding was unpainted, the roof collapsed. The front door had once been painted green, but was all bubbled and rotten, splitting from the inside. One hard push from Joel, and the door disintegrated. We went inside and saw a pale blue table, turned upside down with a heap of broken chairs. There were some utensils scattered about the floor, as well as broken plates and a rusted-out kettle. A pile of ancient newspapers bound in string were stacked to the ceiling in one corner. The place was wet. It smelled like mildew. Then we heard the voice again. Logan's voice. It didn't seem to be coming from the house this time, no. It was coming from below us, somewhere. Joel and I noticed this at the same time and started searching the damp floor for a trapdoor or a hatch of some kind to get below the shack. I pushed the pile of newspapers over and they fell to the floor with a heavy thump. Meanwhile, Joel was throwing the rotted old chair parts aside, looking underneath. It occurred to me that part of the floor we were standing on was actually matted with the remains of an area rug. I pushed with my shoes to try and move it, but it seemed to be fused to the floor. I dropped to my knees and felt around for a seam. It was in vain. We didn't find anything. After our exhaustive search, we went outside to look for a cellar hatch or anything to get to Logan's voice below. I realized it almost immediately when I stepped out into the crude porch. The well. The two of us made our way over to the ancient-looking stone well. We stood on either side and peered down. Joel's headlamp cut down a ways, but the bottom of the well remained dark. I shouted down the shaft, "Hey, Logan, are you down there?" And Joel yelled too, "Logan, can you hear us?" And then Logan's voice echoed up. "Hey, you guys made it! Finally!" Joel gave me an inquisitive look. "What are you doing down there?" Joel said to the darkness of the well. There was no answer. "Logan!" I said. "How the hell did you get down there?" Finally, his voice came back. "Hey, Ed, remember what made Joel think his dog was gone?" Joel and I exchanged a glance. "Yeah, I remember," Joel said smartly. "Right here, dick." Logan's voice again. "Hey, Ed, it's really cold down here." "How do we get you out?" Joel shouted back. "It's so fucking cold, you guys," Logan's voice said. "Give us a second, Logan. We'll think of something," I shouted, grabbing Joel's jacket and pulling him away from the well. When we were a few feet away from the well, I pulled Joel close enough that our faces were nearly touching. "Joel, he's not making any sense." "I know. What do you think he's doing down there?" Joel asked. "Maybe he fell. Maybe he was in shock. Maybe there's another way down there. We should ask him," I said. We went back to the opening of the well, and I shouted down, "Logan, is there another way into the well?" There was a long silence. "Logan!" shouted Joel. "The well?" said Logan's voice finally. "What are you talking about?" "You're in a well, Logan," I said back. "Hey, Ed," said Logan's voice. "You should really come down here. It's delightfully cold." And Logan's voice said, "Delightfully cold?" Something sounded wrong about his voice. It was almost sing-songy. It chilled me to the bone. Joel and I looked at each other. I could see the fear in Joel's face. Joel whispered, "The fuck is he talking about?" Logan's voice rose up from the darkness again. "We got you good with that air horn, didn't we, Ed?" I almost forgotten the air horn on Halloween. All those years ago. Yeah, you got me," I said. "Now let's get you out of there. Don't you want to go home?" "Yeah, Logan, this island's creepy as hell," Joel said down the well. "Maybe we could lower something down for you to grab onto, huh?" Logan's voice came back. Just jump on down, guys. I can catch you." "We need to get you out of there," I said back. "There's no way in hell we're coming down." "Such a beautiful day," Logan said in that strange sing-songy voice again. "Such a beautiful day." And that was the last time I ever heard Logan's voice. Joel and I shouted for him for nearly an hour before we decided to go back to the cabin and call the police. For the following week, the search crew, including the local police, searched Fidget's bar top to bottom. They combed the entire half-mile-long stretch of the forest without finding anything. After that, they searched the lake. Police boats dredged the lake for days until finally they found something. 9 days after the search began, they found what they were looking for. Logan's body was extracted from the lake, about 80 yards away from the shore of Fidget's bar. The police would tell us his neck was broken. When Logan fell from the boat, he hit his head on a large, submerged rock. His death was instant. they told us. He would have been dead before he was completely in the water. Because of the sudden trauma, he exhaled sharply and sank into the bottom, they said. He never drew another breath. So, if Logan was dead when he hit the water, who did we talk to in the forest on Fidget's bar? Whose voice was that? I understand why my story needed to be told. I mean, like I said, I don't expect you to believe me, but why would you? It's crazy. But at least it's out there. And now you can decide for yourself. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. It's still cold. I don't know if you guys have that major freeze that happened to me, but yeah, it's in Texas and it's snowing. So it's pretty damn cold, but you know what's not cold? A hot cup of tea, and my wife still sells tea. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me over at Patreon. That's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. I cannot thank you guys enough. Thank you guys so much for being supporters. That goes for everybody who was down in the description, as well as AcidSystem, BallarmsTheRat, Blake Rattler, Mendoza, Brenna, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, Chainsmoker Dealer, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, Cronut508, CrusaderChocobo, CursepoxPrimarch, Dakota Best, Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Kraus, Ellie Hutmire, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Gemma, Hasley, HIDive nephew, Kimbo Jerry, Hour Minute Seconds Time, Jay Keems, Jed is Pet, Jordan Humble, King Crab, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Old Penguin, Peaceful Buddha, Psychomel, Red Shadowcat, Remember the Sun, Rinku Star, Salty Surprise, Samara Line, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sullyman, Tally Sue, the Chavez Brothers. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and sweet dreams.